Welcome to Sleep for Stories. Thank you for joining us on this relaxing and mysterious journey. Let us know in the comments where in the world you're watching from and what time it is for you. If you enjoy these stories, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give this video a thumbs up, and turn on notifications so you don't miss any future tales. Wishing you a peaceful listening experience and a restful sleep. Beneath the vast expanse of the ocean, where sunlight surrendered to shadows and the world above felt like a distant memory, there existed a place few dared to imagine, a place whispered of in legends and feared by those who had heard the tales. Marina Blake had always been drawn to the unknown, to the places where maps ended and mysteries began. As a seasoned marine archaeologist, she had explored shipwrecks, uncovered ancient artifacts, and unraveled stories hidden beneath the waves. But nothing could have prepared her for what lay ahead. It began on a quiet morning at her small home on the coast, where the sound of waves lapping against the shore was a constant companion. The letter arrived in an envelope of thick parchment, its edges worn as though it had traveled a long way. The handwriting was elegant, almost old-fashioned, and it bore no return address. Inside was a simple message. Miss Blake, there is a place that has been waiting for someone like you. Coordinates enclosed. Resources provided. The rest is up to you. There was no signature, no explanation. Just a set of coordinates that pointed to a remote area of the ocean known as the Black Expanse. It was a region shrouded in mystery, a place where ships vanished and instruments failed. Marina had heard the stories, the rumors of strange lights beneath the waves, and the whispers of a lost city swallowed by the sea. But she was not one to shy away from the unknown. If anything, the letter felt like an invitation meant just for her. Weeks of preparation followed. Marina secured the best equipment, a state-of-the-art submarine capable of withstanding the immense pressure of the deep, advanced sonar systems, and diving gear designed for prolonged exploration. She chose a small crew, just 2 trusted colleagues, Henry, a skilled technician, and Elise, a navigator with a knack for reading the ocean like a map. Together, they set out toward the coordinates, their vessel cutting through the water under a moonlit sky. The journey to the Black Expanse was uneventful at first, the ocean calm and unassuming. But as they neared the coordinates, the atmosphere began to change. The water grew darker, its very surface restless despite the lack of wind. The instruments on board the submarine began to flicker, their readings erratic. Marina could feel the tension building among the crew, though none of them spoke of it. It was as if the ocean itself was aware of their presence, watching, waiting. When they reached the designated spot, Marina stood at the viewport, staring into the abyss. Below them, the sonar revealed a landscape unlike anything she had ever seen. Massive structures rose from the seabed, their outlines jagged and unnatural. They looked ancient, as though time had worn them down yet failed to erase them completely. Marina felt a shiver run down her spine, not of fear, but of awe. This was it. This was what she had been searching for her entire career. The submarine descended slowly, its lights cutting through the darkness. As they approached the structures, their true scale became apparent. Towering spires, crumbling archways, and vast courtyards came into view, each covered in layers of coral and marine growth. It was a city, a forgotten metropolis lost to the depths, untouched for centuries, perhaps millennia. Marina's breath caught in her throat. She could feel the weight of history pressing down on her, the stories of a civilization long gone echoing in the silence. She decided to explore the ruins on foot, donning her diving suit and stepping out into the water. The moment she left the safety of the submarine, stillness enveloped her. The ruins loomed around her, their surfaces etched with symbols that seemed to shift under the light of her flashlight. She moved carefully, her every step stirring up clouds of silt that drifted lazily in the current. It felt as though the city was alive, as though it was watching her. The centerpiece of the city was a massive obelisk, its surface covered in intricate carvings that glowed faintly with an otherworldly light. Marina approached it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. As she reached out to touch the obelisk, a strange vibration coursed through her, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the very stones themselves. The carvings began to change, shifting into patterns, shifting, didn't recognize yet felt she should understand. And then she heard it, a voice, soft and distant, like the murmur of the tide. It wasn't a sound in the water, but something in her mind, a melody of words that defied comprehension, yet resonated deeply. The voice seemed to call her by name, beckoning her further into the city. Marina hesitated, glancing back at the submarine where Henry and Elise waited. But the pull of the voice was irresistible. She moved deeper into the ruins, her flashlight revealing statues of strange, humanoid figures whose elongated features and hollow eyes seemed to follow her every move. As Marina ventured further, the voice grew louder, joined by others. It was a chorus now, a haunting symphony that seemed to emanate from the stones themselves. The city came alive around her, lights flickered in the depths, illuminating pathways that twisted and turned like a labyrinth. Marina felt as though she were being guided, each step drawing her closer to a truth she couldn't yet grasp. The journey into the heart of the city revealed more than Marina could have imagined. Hidden chambers, forgotten artifacts, and secrets buried by time began to unfold before her. Yet, with each discovery came a growing sense of unease. The voice, once a soft murmur, had become insistent, almost demanding. It spoke of a choice, a decision that only she could make, a choice that would determine the fate of the ruins, and perhaps something far greater. Marina stood at the entrance to a grand hall, its doors carved with symbols that seemed to pulse with life. She hesitated, her mind racing with questions. What lay beyond those doors? What truth awaited her in the depths of the underwater cemetery? She took a deep breath, steeling herself, and stepped inside. The story will continue with Marina uncovering the final secrets of the ruins, drawing the listener deeper into the mystery, and providing a calm, suspenseful resolution. Perfect for the sleep theme. Let me know if you'd like this pace or further adjustments. Beneath the vast, dark expanse of the ocean, where sunlight surrendered to the endless depths, Marina Blake prepared to uncover what had only been whispered about in legend. The surface world, vibrant and full of life, was a distant memory, a salve. She stood on the edge of discovery. The letter that had brought her here still lingered in her thoughts, a mysterious invitation to explore the uncharted waters of the black expanse. The coordinates had led her to a place where instruments faltered, and the sea seemed alive with secrets. Her submarine, a sleek marvel of engineering, rested gently atop the waves. As dawn began to break, the soft hues of pink and gold stretched across the horizon, casting a serene glow on the rippling water. Inside the vessel, the hum of machinery provided a steady rhythm, grounding her as she prepared for the descent. Henry, her trusted technician, ran final checks on the systems, while Elise, her navigator, studied the maps and sonar data. "Everything's set, Marina," Henry called out, his voice steady despite the weight of the unknown that awaited them. Marina gave a nod, her expression a mixture of determination and quiet anticipation. She had spent years chasing mysteries beneath the waves, But there was something about this expedition that felt different. The stories about the black expanse were more than mere folklore. They carried an air of warning. Yet, for Marina, the pull of the unknown was irresistible. As the submarine began its slow descent, the world above faded into a blur of light and shadow. The water, at first a dazzling blue, grew darker with each passing meter. Sunlight could only reach so far, and soon they were surrounded by the inky blackness of the deep ocean. The vessel's lights cut through the gloom, revealing the faint outlines of life drifting in the currents, tiny bioluminescent creatures that pulsed with an ethereal glow, like stars scattered in the vastness. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional creak of the submarine's hull as it adjusted to the increasing pressure. Marina sat by the viewport, her eyes scanning the darkness. She could feel the weight of the ocean pressing in, a constant reminder of how small they were in the face of such immensity. Depth. 200 meters, Elise announced quietly. Her voice carried a calm precision, but Marina could sense the tension beneath it. They were venturing into waters where few had dared to go, and even fewer had returned. Then, out of the darkness, shapes began to emerge. At first, they were indistinct shadows against the void, but as the submarine drew closer, the shapes took form. Massive structures rose from the seabed, their outlines jagged and surreal. They were covered in layers of coral and marine growth, their surfaces eroded by time, yet there was an unmistakable symmetry to them, a deliberate design that spoke of Anne, intelligence long lost. Marina leaned forward, her breath catching as the ruins came into view. Towering spires, crumbling archways, and vast courtyards stretched before them, like a city frozen in time. The submarine's lights illuminated the scene, revealing carvings and patterns etched into the stone symbols that seemed both alien and familiar. "This can't be natural," Henry murmured, his eyes wide as he stared at the monitor. "It's not," Marina said softly, her voice tinged with awe. "It's a city, an ancient city." The words hung in the air, heavy with the realization of what they had stumbled upon. The city was vast, far larger than Marina had imagined. It sprawled across the seabed, its structures connected by wide pathways that twisted and turned like a labyrinth. At its center stood a massive obelisk, its surface glowing faintly with an otherworldly light. "Should we approach?" Elise asked, her hands hovering over the controls. Marina hesitated, her mind racing. There was a part of her that felt compelled to go closer, to see the ruins up close. But another part of her, a quieter, more cautious voice, urged her to turn back. The city felt alive. It was as though the ruins were watching them, waiting for something. "Take us closer," she said finally, her curiosity winning out. "We need to see this." The submarine moved forward, its lights casting long shadows across the ruins as they neared the obelisk. The glow intensified, illuminating the carvings that adorned its surface. Marina's eyes widened as she studied the symbols. They seemed to pulse faintly, as though they were alive. "What do you think they mean?" Henry asked, his voice hushed. "I'm not sure," Marina admitted, "but they're unlike anything I've ever seen." The submarine settled gently on the seabed, and Marina prepared to venture outside. She donned her diving suit, the weight of the equipment, a familiar comfort. Henry and Elise stayed behind, monitoring her from the safety of the vessel. Stepping out into the water, Marina was struck by the profound stillness that surrounded her. The ruins loomed around her, their sheer size dwarfing her. She moved carefully, her flashlight cutting through the darkness. The silt stirred with each step, drifting lazily in the current. As she approached the obelisk, she felt a strange vibration in the water, a deep, resonant hum that seemed to come from the ruins themselves. It was faint at first, almost imperceptible, but it grew stronger as she drew closer. The symbols on the obelisk shifted under her gaze, rearranging themselves into patterns she couldn't quite understand. And then she heard a voice, soft and distant, like the whisper of the tide. It wasn't a sound in the water, but something in her mind, a melody of words that defied comprehension, yet resonated deeply. Marina froze, her heart pounding. The voice was faint, barely more than a murmur, but it was there. It called to her, beckoning her deeper into the city. Marina steadied herself, the faint hum reverberating through her suit, growing stronger with every step she took toward the obelisk. The voice, if it could even be called, that was neither sound nor thought. Yet it wrapped itself around her mind like a ribbon of cold water. It spoke no words she could decipher, but its presence was undeniable. The weight of her, it pressed against her, as if the ruins themselves were attempting to communicate. Her fingers brushed against the surface of the obelisk, its stone unnaturally smooth despite the ravages of time. A jolt of sensation shot through her, like a gay pulse. Like a serious silt fractures all use, touching a live wire. She pulled her hand back instinctively, her breath catching in her throat. The symbols etched into the obelisk shifted under her gaze, rearranging themselves into a swirling pattern that seemed to pulse in time with her heartbeat. For a moment, she felt utterly untethered, as if the ocean had folded in on itself and left her suspended in its infinite expanse. "Marina, are you okay?" Henry's voice crackled through her headset, grounding her. I'm fine," she replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "But something is happening here. It's like it's alive." Henry's silence on the other end was unnerving. She could almost picture his furrowed brow as he struggled to make sense of her words. Elisa's voice came through next, calm but laced with concern. "We're picking up strange energy readings from the obelisk. It's spiking intermittently. It's not natural." Marina didn't need the confirmation. She could feel it in her bones. The obelisk was a nexus, a heart beating faintly within the ruins, its energy pulsing outward like ripples in a still pond. As she turned to survey the city, she noticed something she hadn't before. Lights flickering faintly in the distant structures, like fireflies blinking in the darkness. They were scattered throughout the ruins, their glow faint but rhythmic, as if they were communicating with one another. Drawn by an invisible force, Marina moved further into the city. The pathways beneath her feet were worn smooth, carved from a stone she couldn't identify. Statues lined the edges of the plaza, their features elongated and otherworldly. They depicted beings with wide, hollow eyes and hands raised toward the sky, as if in prayer or supplication. The carvings on their bodies matched the symbols on the obelisk, glowing faintly in the submarine's lights. She passed one of the statues, her flashlight casting its shadow across the plaza. For a moment, she thought the statue's head had turned to follow her, but when she whipped around, it stood as still as ever. The thought lingered, an itch at the back of her mind that she couldn't shake. The city seemed to grow darker the deeper she went, the flickering lights becoming her only guide. The structures around her loomed higher, their architecture impossibly intricate. She couldn't shake the feeling that the city was watching her. It wasn't just the statues or the symbols, it was the city itself. The walls seemed to lean in closer, the pathways narrowing, as if steering her toward some unseen destination. Marina ventured further. The voice grew louder in her mind. It wasn't a single voice anymore. but a chorus layered and resonant, like the hum of a deep ocean current. It whispered to her of a great calamity, of a city swallowed by the sea and a people who had sought to defy the natural order. The words or thoughts were fragmented, like shards of a broken mirror, but they painted a picture of hubris and despair. She stumbled upon an open courtyard, its center dominated by a massive, circular pool. The water within was eerily still, its surface reflecting the faint glow of the surrounding lights. As she approached, she saw her reflection ripple and shift, her face blurring into something unrecognizable. Her reflection's unrecognizable eyes were darker, her features sharper, alien, yet hauntingly familiar. She stepped back, her heart racing, but the water remained still, its surface glassy and unbroken. "Marina, we're losing your signal." Elise's voice crackled through her headset, distorted and faint. "Are you copy? Readings?" "Dangerous, Elise," Marina called out, but her voice felt swallowed by the water around her. She tapped her headset, but the static only grew louder, and then the voices in her mind spoke clearly. "For the first time, you are not alone." Marina froze, the words sending a chill down her spine. They weren't a warning, they were a statement, cold and absolute. She turned, her flashlight sweeping across the courtyard, but nothing moved. The statues stood silent, their hollow eyes fixed on her, the ruins fixed on her. The ruins were empty, yet the sensation of being watched was overwhelming. The pool began to stir, faint ripples spreading across its surface. Slowly, something rose from the water, an object, ancient and ornate. It was a tablet, carved from the same stone as the obelisk, its surface covered in the same shifting symbols. It hovered just above the water, its glow pulsating softly. Marina approached it cautiously, her instincts screaming at her to turn back, but her curiosity pushing her to turn back, but her curiosity pushing her forward. As her fingers brushed against the tablet, a surge of energy coursed through her, pulling her into a vision. She was no longer in the courtyard, but standing in a city alive with light and movement. Beings like those depicted in The statues moved around her, their voices a harmonious blend of music and speech. The city was vibrant, its towers reaching for the surface, its people filled with purpose. But above them loomed a shadow, a great wave, dark and unyielding, crashing down to consume everything. The vision shifted. The people were gone, replaced by silence and ruin. The obelisk stood alone, its light dimming as the city sank deeper into the abyss. And then Marina saw herself, standing in the abyss. And then Marina saw herself, standing in the ruins, the tablet in her hands. The vision ended as abruptly as it had begun, leaving her gasping for air. She staggered back, her heart pounding. The tablet remained suspended above the pool, its glow steady. The voices in her mind were silent now, but the weight of their presence lingered. Marina knew she had uncovered something far greater than she had anticipated, something that was not meant to be found. Marina stood still for a moment, her breathing steadying as she tried to process what she had just experienced. The city felt alive in a way she couldn't fully comprehend, as though it were aware of her presence and testing her resolve. The tablet continued to hover above the water, its faint glow casting shifting patterns across the courtyard. Marina was reluctant to touch it again, fearing another vision, yet she couldn't bring herself to walk away. The voices in her mind had grown silent, but the weight of their message lingered. The ruins weren't just a forgotten remnant of some ancient civilization. They were a warning, a memorial to something catastrophic. Marina couldn't help but wonder if the city's downfall had been self-inflicted or if it had been the result of something far beyond its something, people's control. Her flashlight flickered, the beam wavering as she turned back toward the path she had come from. The silence around her felt heavier now, as though the city were holding its breath. She started back toward the submarine, her steps careful and deliberate. The statues seemed closer than before, their hollow eyes following her as she moved. She tried to shake off the feeling, telling herself it was just her imagination, but the sensation persisted. As she neared the obelisk, a low rumble vibrated through the ground beneath her feet. It wasn't loud, but it was deep, resonating through the ruins like a distant echo. Marina paused, her hand resting on a nearby pillar for balance. The rumble grew stronger, and she realized it wasn't just the ground, it was the obelisk. The symbols on its surface flared to life, their light pulsing in time with the vibrations. "Marina, can you hear us?" Elise's voice crackled through the headset, faint but audible. "I hear you," Marina replied, her voice steady despite the unease creeping into her chest. "Something's happening. The obelisk is reacting to something. We're picking up intense energy spikes." Henry cut in. "It's like the whole area is wait, Marina. You need to get back to the submarine now." Marina's heart raced as she glanced back at the path leading to the obelisk. The flickering lights in the ruins were growing brighter, their rhythm chaotic. The city felt alive in a way that was no longer passive. It was waking up. The hum in the water grew louder, filling her ears with a low, resonant drone. The ruins weren't just responding to her presence. They were reacting to something she had triggered. "I'm on my way," she said, forcing her legs to move, even as her instincts screamed at her to stay. The pull of the obelisk and the tablet was strong, but she knew she couldn't risk staying any longer. As she made her way back to the submarine, the ruins seemed to shift around her. Pathways that had been clear moments ago were now blocked by fallen debris, and new ones had appeared where there had been none before. It was as though the city were reshaping itself, its labyrinthine structure twisting and turning to keep her within its grasp. Marina's breathing quickened as she navigated the changing terrain. Her flashlight revealed more statues, their forms increasingly distorted. Some appeared to be reaching out, their arms stretched toward her as though pleading for something. Others were frozen mid-motion, their poses unnatural and unsettling. She tried not to look too closely, focusing instead on the faint glow of the submarine's lights in the distance. When she finally reached the submarine, her relief was palpable. Henry was waiting at the airlock, his expression a mix of worry and urgency. "What happened out there?" he asked as she climbed inside. "You were gone for too long," Marina hesitated, unsure how to explain what she had experienced. "The city, it's alive," she said finally. "I don't know how else to describe it. There's something here, something powerful. It's not just ruins, it's a memory, a warning." Henry and Elise exchanged a glance, their faces pale. "We need to leave," Elise said. "The energy readings are off the charts." "Whatever's happening, it's not safe to stay." Marina nodded, though a part of her resisted the idea of leaving. She felt as though she had only scratched the surface of the city's secrets, but she knew they couldn't risk staying any longer. The submarine's engines roared to life, and the vessel began its ascent. As they rose through the water, Marina couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. The ruins faded into the darkness below, their lights dimming as the submarine ascended. The hum in the water grew fainter, but it never fully disappeared. It was as though the city were bidding them farewell, its presence lingering in the back of her mind. When they broke the surface, the sunlight was blinding, a stark contrast to the darkness of the deep. Marina stepped out onto the deck, the salty air filling her lungs. She stared out at the endless horizon, her thoughts racing. The black expanse had revealed its secrets, but they were far from fully understood. The ruins, the obelisk, the tablet, they were fragments of a story that demanded to be told. Marina knew she couldn't leave it behind. The city's whispers had taken root in her mind, their resonance impossible to ignore. She would return, she decided, not for the thrill of discovery, but to uncover the truth of what lay beneath the waves. The underwater cemetery was not just a place of the past, it was a mirror, reflecting the fragility of the present and the uncertainty of the future. For now, though, she let the future rhythm of the ocean calm her racing thoughts. The waves lapped gently against the hull of the submarine, their sound soothing and steady. The sun dipped lower on the horizon, casting the world in shades of gold and amber. Marina closed her eyes, letting the peace of the moment wash over her, even as the whispers of the deep lingered in her mind, waiting for her to return. As the submarine gently swayed on the surface, Marina couldn't ignore the sensation gnawing at her, a pull, like the ruins below had latched onto her very soul. Even as the sunlight warmed her skin and the gentle sound of waves filled her ears, the whispers lingered in the recesses of her mind. They were quieter now, distant, but ever present, like a melody she couldn't quite forget. Henry stepped onto the deck beside her, his face etched with concern. "You're not really going to let this go, are you?" he asked, his voice soft but certain. He had known Marina long enough to recognize the spark in her eyes, the one that appeared whenever she uncovered something extraordinary. Marina shook her head slowly. "I can't," she admitted. "This isn't... Is it?" She admitted. "This isn't just another wreck or forgotten city. There's something alive down there. Something waiting." Elise joined them. Her arms crossed as she leaned against the railing. "We felt it too," she said quietly. It was like the whole place had a heartbeat. "Whatever's down there, it's not just ruins. It's something more." The three of them stood in silence for a moment, the weight of their discovery settling over them like a heavy fog. The world above seemed almost trivial in comparison to what lay beneath. Marina's thoughts swirled with possibilities, the visions, the voices, the glowing symbols. They were pieces of a puzzle she had barely begun to understand. That night, as the submarine anchored in calmer waters, Marina lay awake in her small cabin. The soft hum of the vessel was a soothing background noise, but her mind refused to quiet. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the obelisk, the statues, the tablet hovering above the still pool. The whispers were faint now, like echoes in a distant cave, but they tugged at her, beckoning her back. She finally gave up on sleep and made her way to the observation deck. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, dark, dark and inscrutable. The stars above mirrored the bioluminescent life below, creating the illusion of an infinite expanse. She leaned against the railing, letting the cool breeze brush against her face, and then she saw it, a faint light in the water. Far below the surface, it pulsed rhythmically, like a heartbeat, growing brighter and then dimmer in an unchanging pattern. Marina's breath caught in her throat. It wasn't the glow of bioluminescent creatures or the flicker of a submerged light. It was something else, something familiar. Her heart pounded as she turned to the control room. "Henry, Elise, wake up," she called out, her voice urgent but steady. "You need to see this." The two stumbled groggily into the room moments later, their expressions shifting from annoyance to alarm as Marina pointed toward the viewport. The light was faint but unmistakable, its glow cutting through the darkness like a beacon. "It's the ruins," Marina said. "Ruins," Marina said, voice trembling with a mix of fear and excitement. "They're calling us back." Henry frowned, his hands hovering over the control panel. "We just got out of there. Do you really think it's a good idea to go back? Whatevs down there? It's not exactly friendly." "It's not hostile either," Marina countered. "At least, Not yet, but it's trying to communicate. We can't just ignore it, Elise sighed, rubbing the back of her neck. This is insane, rubbing the back of her neck. This is insane, she muttered. But I guess we didn't come all this way to turn back now. The decision was made. The submarine descended once more, the faint light guiding them like a siren song. The water grew darker, colder as they left the surface. Behind, the hum of the ruins returned, faint at first but growing stronger as they approached. It was as though the city had been waiting for them, its pulse quickening in anticipation as the ruins came into view. Marina felt a strange sense of familiarity, as if she were returning home after a long absence. The pathways were unchanged, the statues still frozen in their silent vigil. But the lights were brighter now, illuminating the city in a way that felt almost welcoming. The submarine settled near the obelisk once more, its glow now steady and unwavering. Marina wasted no time donning her suit and stepping out into the water. This time, the stillness felt less oppressive, as though the city had accepted her presence. She moved carefully, her flashlight sweeping across the ruins. The obelisk's symbols pulsed faintly, responding to her approach. Marina placed her hand on its surface, expecting another jolt of energy. But this time there was only warmth, a gentle, comforting sensation that spread through her body. The whispers returned, clearer now, though still incomprehensible, and then the ground beneath her shifted. At first, she thought it was an earthquake, but the movement was too controlled, too deliberate. The courtyard she stood in began to descend, the stone beneath her feet sinking into the earth like an elevator. Marina's heart raced as the ruins above disappeared from view, replaced by a vast chamber that seemed to stretch endlessly into the darkness. The chamber was unlike anything she had seen before. Its walls were lined with what appeared to be sarcophagi, each one intricately carved and glowing faintly with the same light as the obelisk. The air, or rather, the water was thick with a sense of reverence, as though she had entered a sacred space. Marina moved cautiously, her flashlight illuminating the sarcophagi one by one. Wow! The figures carved into them were similar to the statues above, their features elongated and otherworldly. But these weren't just decorative, they felt personal, as though each one held a story, a life frozen in time. The whispers grew louder, coalescing into a single, resonant voice. You have Marina froze, her heart pounding. The voice was clear now, no longer a faint murmur, but a powerful presence that seemed to fill the chamber. It wasn't threatening, but it carried an undeniable authority. What is this place? Marina asked, her voice barely a whisper. The voice didn't answer directly. Instead, the symbols on the sarcophagi began to glow brighter, their light spreading across the chamber like ripples in a pond. Marina watched in awe as the carvings shifted, rearranging themselves into patterns she couldn't comprehend but felt drawn to nonetheless. This was no ordinary ruin. This was a place of preservation, of memory. And Marina was no longer just an observer, she was a part of its story. The glow intensified, casting the entire chamber in a soft, otherworldly light. Marina turned slowly, her eyes scanning every corner of the vast space. The sarcophagi seemed to hum, faintly now, their vibrations merging into the same rhythm she had felt within the obelisk above. It was as if the entire structure, the city itself, was alive, its energy coursing through every carved stone and every glowing symbol. The voice returned, resonating in her mind, not with words, but with emotions, curiosity, welcome, and an undertone of caution. It was as though the ruins were assessing her, trying to determine if she was worthy of what lay hidden in its depths. Her flashlight flickered again, the beam struggling to compete with the ambient glow of the chamber. Marina approached one of the sarcophagi, its surface smooth and cool beneath her gloved hand. The carvings on its lid shifted under her touch, rearranging themselves into patterns that seemed almost intelligible, as though on the verge of revealing a language she could understand. And then, with a soft hiss, the lid began to slide open. Marina stepped back, her heart hammering in her chest. The movement was deliberate, precise, as if triggered by her presence. As the lid fully retracted, she peered inside, expecting to see the remains of one of the city's ancient inhabitants. But the sarcophagus was empty, or so it seemed. A faint mist began to rise from within, swirling in intricate patterns that coalesced into a figure. It was humanoid, its form translucent and shimmering, like water caught in the moonlight. The figure's eyes large, hollow, and filled with a strange light, locked onto Marina. It didn't speak, but its presence was overwhelming, a flood of emotions and images that poured into her mind. She saw the city as it had once been, vibrant, bustling with life, its towers reaching toward the surface and its people thriving in harmony with the ocean. But then came the calamity, a great wave of darkness that swept through the city, consuming everything in its path. The obelisk and the sarcophagi had been their last hope, a way to preserve what remained of their civilization. The figure, what remained of their civilization, was one of them, a guardian, tasked with ensuring that the city's secrets would not be lost to time. Marina felt a pang of sorrow, the weight of their tragedy pressing down on her. "What happened to you?" she whispered, her voice trembling. The figure's form flickered, its outline blurring as more images filled her mind. She saw the obelisk being constructed, its glowing symbols carefully etched into its surface. She saw the sarcophagi being sealed one by one as the city's inhabitants surrendered themselves to their fate. And then she saw the wave, a dark, monstrous force that seemed almost alive, its shadow swallowing the light of the city. The vision faded, leaving Marina breathless. The figure reached out, its hand hovering just above hers. She felt a surge of warmth, a connection that transcended language. It wasn't just showing her their past, it was asking for her help. Marina's headset crackled to life, breaking the spell. "Marina, are you okay?" Henry's voice was sharp with worry. "We're picking up massive energy spikes. You need to get out of there now." "I can't," Marina replied, her voice resolute. "There's something here, something I need to understand." "I'm close, Henry. I can feel it." Elisa's voice cut in, more frantic. "The readings are off the charts. Whatever's happening down there, it's escalating. If you don't come back now, we might lose you." Marina hesitated, torn between the urgency of their warnings, and the pull of the ruins. The figure in the sarcophagus seemed to sense her conflict. It gestured toward the far end of the chamber, where a doorway carved into the stone glowed faintly. The message was clear. There was more to see, discover. She took a deep breath, steeling herself. "Just give me a little more time," she said. "I'm not leaving yet." The doorway led to a narrow corridor, its walls lined with more carvings that pulsed faintly with light. The the water felt heavier here, thick with an energy that made her skin prickle. As she moved deeper, the hum grew louder, resonating in her chest like a second heartbeat. The corridor opened into another chamber, smaller but no less impressive. At its center stood a pedestal, atop which rested a sphere of shimmering light. The sphere seemed to contain an entire galaxy, its surface swirling with stars and nebulae. Marina approached cautiously, her eyes wide with wonder. The voice in her mind returned, stronger now. "This is our legacy, our warning." Marina reached out, her hand trembling as it hovered above the sphere. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, a flood of images and emotions overwhelmed her. She saw the city's final moments, its people desperately sealing the sarcophagi and activating the obelisk. She felt their fear, their hope, and their resignation. But she also saw something else, a darkness beyond the wave, a force that had driven it, watching and waiting in the depths. The vision shifted, showing her the present. The darkness was still there, dormant but restless, its shadow stretching toward the ruins. The city wasn't just a relic of the past beacon, a warning to the surface world of what lay beneath. Marina gasped as the vision ended, her knees buckling. She clutched the pedestal for support, her mind racing. The city's secrets weren't just about its own history. They were about the future. The danger wasn't gone. It had merely been sleeping, the sphere dimmed, its light fading as if exhausted. Marina knew she couldn't stay any longer. She had to return to the surface, to warn the world of what she had seen. But as she turned to leave, the figure from the sarcophagus appeared before her once more. Its gaze was steady, its presence calm. "Remember," the voice said, its tone both gentle and firm. "The ocean holds more than you can imagine. Respect it, or face what we could not." Marina felt the weight of the figure's words pressing against her chest. The solemnity of the moment was overwhelming, and her mind raced to make sense of everything she had seen and felt. The vision of the shadow, the vision of the shadow, the calamity that had consumed this once great city, and the dire warning it carried. These weren't just remnants of the past. They were threads, woven into the present and the future. The sphere's glow dimmed further, leaving the chamber in an eerie twilight. Marina turned to face the guardian once more, its translucent form now faint, as if the effort of communicating had drained it. For a moment, she wondered if it might disappear entirely, leaving her alone in the depths. But the figure lingered, its hollow eyes fixed on her as though silently asking her to remember everything she had witnessed. "I'll tell them," she whispered, though the words felt insufficient. "I'll make sure the world knows." The figure nodded, or a tad, least, Marina thought it did. The gesture was subtle, more like a ripple of light across its form. It raised one hand, pointing back toward the corridor she had entered through. The message was clear. It was time to leave. Marina hesitated, her gaze lingering on the chamber and the faintly glowing sarcophagi. This place held answers, yes, but it also held dangers she couldn't yet comprehend. She felt the pull of the city, the sense that it wasn't done with her yet. But she couldn't stay. Not now. Taking a deep breath, she turned and retraced her steps through the corridor. The carvings along the walls seemed different now, brighter, their patterns more fluid. It was as if the city were responding to her departure, guiding her back to the surface. The hum in the water grew softer, fading into the background like a heartbeat slowing to rest. When she emerged into the larger chamber, the obelisk's light was steady and serene. The symbols no longer shifted or pulsed. They seemed at peace, as though the city had accepted her presence. Marina glanced back toward the courtyard, half expecting the pool to stir or the tablet to rise again. But all was still. Whatever connection she had made with the city had quieted for now. As she approached the submarine, the familiar crackle of her headset brought her back to the present. "Marina, are you all right?" Henry's voice was tight with worry. "We've been watching the energy levels spike and drop like crazy. We thought we lost you." "I'm fine," she replied, though her voice was tinged with exhaustion. I'll explain everything once I'm inside. Just get ready to ascend. We need to leave." The submarine's airlock welcomed her with a hiss, and she stepped inside, shedding her diving gear with practiced ease. Henry and Elise were waiting for her. Their expressions a mixture of relief and curiosity. Marina sank into a chair, her body heavy with fatigue, and tried to find the words to explain what she had experienced. It's alive, she began, her voice soft but steady. The city, the city, the city, all the lisk, the whatever's in those sarcophagi, it's all connected. It's not just ruins, it's a memory. A warning. Elise frowned, her brow furrowed. A warning of what? Marina hesitated, her mind replaying the visions she had seen. Of something dark, something they couldn't stop. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's still down there, waiting. The silence that followed was heavy. The weight of her. Weight. The silence that followed was heavy. The weight of her. Words settling over them like a storm cloud. Henry broke it with a nervous laugh, though there was no humor in it. So what? We just leave and hope it doesn't wake up. No, Marina said firmly. We don't ignore this. We document everything. We warn people. If this city is a warning, then we have to listen. Elise nodded slowly, though her expression remained troubled. And what if no one believes us? This isn't exactly something we can explain with a PowerPoint presentation. Marina didn't have an answer. The truth of what they had discovered was too vast, too extraordinary to fit into a neat explanation. But she knew one thing for certain. They couldn't turn their backs on it. The submarine began its ascent, the ruins growing smaller and fainter as they climbed toward the surface. Marina stood at the viewport, her eyes fixed on the obelisk until it disappeared into the darkness. The hum of the city lingered in her mind, faint but steady, like an echo that refused to fade. When they broke the surface, the world above felt jarringly mundane. The sky was a soft blue, streaked with the warm hues of dawn, and the water sparkled in the sunlight. It was a stark contrast to the world they had left behind, a world of shadows and whispers, ancient and alive. Marina stepped onto the deck, the salty air filling her lungs. She looked out at the horizon, her thoughts a whirlwind of questions and possibilities. The ocean had always been a place of mystery, a vast and unknowable frontier. But now, it felt more alive than ever, its secrets more profound than she could have imagined. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
Elise asked, joining her at the railing. Marina didn't answer right away. Her gaze was fixed on the waves, her mind already drifting back to the city below. She knew this was only the beginning. The ruins had chosen her for a reason, and she knew for a reason, and she couldn't ignore their call. We keep going, she said finally, her voice resolute. We don't stop until we understand. And as the submarine began its journey back to shore, Marina couldn't shake the feeling that the city was still watching her, its whispers waiting for the right moment to return. Marina stared at the endless expanse of ocean, the horizon blurred by the rising mist of morning. Her thoughts were heavy, pulled downward by the ruins and the voices that lingered in her mind like ghosts. Even now, as the submarine gently swayed with the current, she could feel it, that subtle hum, that rhythm that seemed to echo in her chest. It wasn't just the city that was alive. The ocean itself seemed to breathe with the memory of what it had consumed. Back inside the submarine, Henry and Elise busied themselves with diagnostics, their faces tight with concentration. The energy spikes they had observed during Marina's dive were unlike anything they had ever encountered. Data scrolled across the monitors, streams of numbers and patterns that refused to conform to any known model. It was as though the ocean's very fabric had been disturbed, its balance disrupted. Marina, Henry called out. Disrupted, voice hesitant. You should see this. She turned from the viewport, her curiosity piqued. Henry gestured to one of the monitors, where a series of overlapping waves created a jagged pattern. These readings, he began, his tone uneasy. They started when you were near the obelisk at first. We thought it was just interference, but it's not. It's resonant. Resonant, Marina repeated, moving closer. What do you mean? Henry sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's like the city was responding to you, matching your presence, your energy. I don't know how else to explain it. Elise, seated nearby, leaned back in her chair, her arms crossed. It's not just the obelisk, she added. The entire area was reacting. The city was awake. Marina's gaze flickered between them, her mind racing. She had felt it too, the sense that she was being observed, that the ruins were alive in a way that defied explanation, but hearing it confirmed by her team made it all the more real. Do you think it's dangerous? Elise asked, her voice quieter now. Marina hesitated, the memory of the vision still fresh in her mind. The wave of darkness, the shadow that had consumed the city, it wasn't just a relic of the past. It was a warning, a glimpse of something still lingering in the depths. She couldn't deny the possibility that their presence had disturbed something best left undisturbed. It's not dangerous yet, she said finally, but we can't assume it will stay that way. The city isn't just a place, it's an entity, and it knows we're here. Henry exhaled sharply, his fingers drumming against the console. So what do we do? Report this? Publish the findings? Or bury it and pretend we never came here? Marina didn't respond immediately. The thought of revealing the ruins to the world filled her with equal parts excitement and dread. What if others came, drawn by the allure of discovery, and woke the shadow that the city had so desperately tried to contain? But at the same time, she couldn't let the truth stay hidden. The ruins held answers about the past, about the ocean, and perhaps even about humanity itself. We document everything, she said at last. Every detail, every reading, every reading, every reading, observation. And then we decide, carefully. Elise nodded, though her expression remained troubled. And if the city calls you back? She asked. What then? Marina didn't answer. She didn't need to. The call of the city was already a part of her, woven into her thoughts like a thread she couldn't unravel. She knew she would return. The ruins had chosen her, and she couldn't ignore their pull. The ruins had chosen her, and she couldn't ignore their pull. Night. As the submarine drifted in calmer waters, Marina sat alone on the observation deck. The stars above were obscured by clouds, and the ocean stretched into darkness, its surface rippling faintly in the breeze. She closed her eyes, letting the rhythm of the waves steady her racing thoughts. But even in the stillness, she could feel it, the hum, the pulse of the ruins far below. Sleep eluded her, and her mind kept circling back to the sarcophagi, the guardian and the tablet. She thought of the symbols on the obelisk, the way they had rearranged themselves as though speaking a language just beyond her comprehension. What was the city trying to tell her? And why had it chosen her to hear its voice? A faint splash broke the silence, pulling her from her thoughts. She opened her eyes, scanning the water for its source. At first, there was nothing, just the gentle lapping of the waves against the hull. But then, she saw it. A faint glow beneath the surface, pulsing in the same rhythm as the obelisk. Her breath caught. The light was moving, drifting closer to the submarine. It wasn't the chaotic flicker of bioluminescent creatures, or the steady beam of an underwater lamp. It was deliberate, purposeful, as it neared. Marina realized it wasn't just one light, it was many, a cluster of faintly glowing orbs that seemed to float in perfect harmony. She leaned over the railing, her curiosity overpowering her caution. The orbs hovered just beneath the surface, their light casting shimmering patterns across the water. For a moment, she thought they might be some kind of natural phenomenon, an undiscovered species drawn to the energy of the ruins. But then one of them broke the surface, its glow intensifying as it rose into the air. Marina froze, her heart pounding. The orb floated before her, its light soft and steady, almost inviting. It pulsed faintly, as though breathing, and she felt the same hum she had experienced near the obelisk. It wasn't just light, it was alive. The orb moved closer, and Marina reached out instinctively. The moment her fingers brushed its surface, a rush of warmth spread through her, and her mind filled with images. The ruins, the guardian, the sphere in the chamber, they all returned, sharper and more vivid. But there was something new now, something she hadn't seen before. She saw herself, standing in the ruins, her hand resting on the ruins, her hand resting on the obelisk. The symbols glowed brightly, and the city seemed to pulse with life, its energy flowing through her. She felt the connection deepen, the bond between her and the city growing stronger. And then she saw the shadow, its darkness creeping closer, its edges tinged with crimson light. The vision ended abruptly, leaving Marina gasping for breath. The orb hovered for a moment longer before drifting back into the water, its glow fading as it sank beneath the waves. Marina watched it disappear, her thoughts a whirlwind of confusion and fear. The city wasn't done with her. It had sent her a message, a warning, and perhaps a challenge, whatever lay in the depths of the black expanse. It wasn't just waiting. It wasn't just waiting. It was watching. Marina stayed rooted in place, her hand still trembling slightly from where it had touched the orb. The night air around her felt heavier now, charged with the same energy she had felt in the ruins. The ocean stretched endlessly before her, its surface calm and unassuming, as though trying to mask the secrets it held beneath. She finally stepped back from the railing, her breath unsteady. The images the orb had shown her lingered in her mind, sharp, vivid, and impossible to ignore. The connection between her and the ruins had deepened, solidified, and the message it conveyed was clear. She wasn't done, or perhaps it wasn't done with her. Marina's thoughts were interrupted by the sound of footsteps behind her. She turned to see Henry, his face etched with concern. He had a clipboard in hand, though it hung loosely at his side as he studied her expression. "You're out here again," he said softly, his voice laced with worry. "What happened?" She hesitated, unsure how to explain what she had seen. The visions, the orb, the growing pull of the ruins, it felt too vast, too strange to put into words. But Henry's gaze was steady, patient, and she knew she couldn't keep it to herself. "There's more," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "The city, it's reaching out. It sent me something, a vision, a warning. The shadow we saw, the one that consumed the city, it's still there. It's waiting." Henry frowned, his brow furrowed deeply. "You're sure? I mean, could it just be your mind playing tricks on you? The pressure, the stress." Marina shook her head. "No, it wasn't just in my head. The orb, I touched it. It showed me things. The ruins are alive. Henry, they're trying to tell us something, and I don't think we can ignore it. Henry, they're trying to tell us something, and I don't think we can ignore it," sighed, running a hand through his hair. "This is bigger than us, Marina. If what you're saying is true, we're dealing with something we don't understand, something we might not be able to handle." "I know," she said quietly, "but we have to try." The next morning, the team convened in the submarine's control room, the tension palpable as they reviewed the data from their dive. Elise had plotted a detailed map of the ruins, marking key structures and areas of interest. The obelisk and the central chamber were prominent points, their energy readings far exceeding anything recorded elsewhere. "This is where it gets strange," Elise said, pointing to a series of smaller markers scattered across the map. "These aren't structures. They're anomalies, pockets of energy that don't seem connected to the city itself. They're scattered, almost random, but they're stronger than anything we've seen so far." Marina leaned over the map, her eyes narrowing. Could they be remnants? Fragments of whatever caused the calamity? Maybe, Elise replied, though her tone was uncertain. But if they are, they're active. They're pulsing in the same rhythm as the obelisk. Henry crossed his arms, his expression grim. If they're fragments of the calamity, does that mean it's spreading? Could the shadow be waking up? The question hung in the air, heavy and unspoken until now. Marina felt her stomach tighten. The thought of the shadow, vast, consuming, and ancient, beginning to stir, sent a chill down her spine. "We don't know that yet," she said, her voice steady despite the unease gnawing at her. "But we need to find out." Elisa's eyebrows shot up. "You're not seriously suggesting we go back down there?" Marina met her gaze. "We don't have a choice. If we don't understand what's happening, how can we stop it? The ruins hold the answers. We just have to be willing to find them." Henry sighed heavily, but he didn't argue. He knew Marina well enough to recognize that her mind was made up, and despite his reservations, a part of him couldn't deny the pull of the mystery either. The ruins weren't just a discovery, they were a challenge, an enigma that demanded to be unraveled. The second descent felt different from the first. The anticipation was heavier, tinged with a sense of foreboding. The submarine's lights pierced the darkness, illuminating the familiar outlines of the ruins as they came into view. The obelisk stood tall, its glow steady and unwavering, like a beacon guiding them back. Marina prepared herself, donning her praying suit with practiced ease. But this time, she wasn't alone. Henry had insisted on accompanying her despite her protests. "If you're going back into the lion's den," he had said, "you're not going alone." As they stepped out into the water, the hum returned, faint but unmistakable. The city seemed to welcome them, its energy wrapping around them like a gentle current. Marina led the way, her flashlight cutting through the murk as they moved toward the obelisk. The symbols on its gallade moved toward the obelisk. Surface pulsed faintly as they approached, their light casting shifting patterns across the stone. Marina placed her hand on the obelisk, the now familiar warmth spreading through her. But this time, the connection was stronger. More immediate. The hum intensified, resonating in her chest. "Do you feel that?" she asked, glancing at Henry. He nodded, his eyes wide. "It's like it's alive." Before she could respond, the ground beneath them shifted. The same mechanism that had activated before began to move, the stone sinking slowly to reveal the hidden chamber below. Marina felt a surge of apprehension as she stepped onto the platform, motioning for Henry to follow. The descent into the chamber was silent, save for the faint hum that grew louder with each passing moment. The sarcophagi came into view once more, their glow steady and serene. But something was different now. The air thicker, heavier, was charged with an intensity that hadn't been there before. The guardian appeared before them, its translucent form shimmering faintly. Marina felt Henry tense beside her, but she held her ground, the figure's hollow eyes fixed on her, its presence both commanding and calm. It gestured toward the pedestal at the center of the chamber, where the sphere of light awaited. Marina approached cautiously, her movements deliberate. The sphere pulsed faintly, its glow inviting yet mysterious. She reached out, her fingers brushing its surface. And once again, the visions came. But this time, they were different. She saw the shadow, vast and unrelenting, creeping toward the city like a living storm. She saw the obelisk, its light faltering as the darkness closed in, and she saw herself, standing at the heart of the ruins, the guardian at her side. The city wasn't just a warning, it was a battleground, and she was at its center. The vision faded, but the images burned brightly in Marina's mind. Her breathing was shallow, her body trembling from the intensity of what she had seen. The shadow, it was more than a calamity, more than a force of destruction. It was alive, patient, and relentless. The ruins were not merely a memorial to what had been lost. They were a fortress, a last line of defense against something that had only been temporarily subdued. Henry's voice broke through her haze, grounding her. "Marina, what is it? What did you see?" She turned to him, her eyes wide and unsteady. "The shadow," she said softly. It's not gone. It's waiting. And the city, it wasn't just destroyed. It was fighting back. The obelisk, the sarcophagi, everything they weren't. Monuments, they were weapons." Henry's face paled, his hands clenching into fists at his sides. "Weapons? Against what?" Marina shook her head, her thoughts racing. "I don't know what it is, only what it feels like. It's ancient, powerful, and it's not done." The Guardian remained still, its hollow eyes fixed on her. Marina could feel its presence, steady and unwavering, as though it were waiting for her to understand something she hadn't yet grasped. The symbols on the walls glowed faintly, their light pulsating in time with the sphere's soft hum. "What are we supposed to do?" Marina whispered, her voice tinged with desperation. "Why, show me this. Why bring me here?" The Guardian raised its hand, gesturing toward the far side of the chamber. A new doorway stood there, its edges outlined in faint light. Marina hadn't noticed it before. It hadn't been there before. The city was revealing itself in pieces, unfolding its mysteries one step at a time. Henry hesitated as Marina began to move toward the doorway. "Are you sure about this?" he asked, his voice low. "No," she admitted, "but we don't have a choice." The passage beyond the doorway was narrow and winding, its walls lined with intricate carvings that seemed to shift and shimmer as they passed. The hum grew louder, more insistent, vibrating in their bones. Marina felt a strange sense of anticipation, as though the city itself was preparing for something. They emerged into a vast cavern, larger than any space they had seen before. The ceiling stretched as seen before, high above, lost in shadows, while the floor was covered in what looked like shimmering pools of liquid light. In the center of the cavern stood a massive structure, unlike anything they had encountered. It was spherical, its surface smooth and unbroken, and it pulsed with a deep, resonant glow. Marina approached cautiously, her footsteps echoing softly in the cavern. The sphere seemed to react to her presence, its light intensifying as she drew nearer. She could feel its energy. Powerful and overwhelming, but not hostile. It was curious. "What is that?" Henry asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Marina didn't answer. Her attention was entirely focused on the sphere. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and as her fingers touched its surface, the world around her dissolved. Was no longer in the cavern. She was in the city, but not the ruins she had explored. This city was alive, vibrant, its towers gleaming under a sunlit sky. The people moved with purpose, their voices a harmonious blend of music and speech. Marina felt like an intruder, an observer of a world that existed long before her time. The vision shifted. The city's vibrancy dimmed. Its people gathered in the central plaza beneath the obelisk. Their faces were solemn, their movements hurried. The shadow loomed on the horizon, vast and unrelenting, a storm of darkness that swallowed everything in its path. The obelisk flared to life, its symbols glowing brightly as the people worked desperately to activate its defenses. But it wasn't enough. The shadow descended upon the city, its tendrils wrapping around the towers and pulling them into the abyss. The obelisk's light flickered, dimmed, and finally went out. The people disappeared, their forms dissolving into light as they retreated into the sarcophagi, their final sanctuary. And then Marina saw herself, standing in the ruins as they were now, the shadow rising once more. The obelisk flared to life again, its light bright and defiant, But this, light, bright, and defiant time, she wasn't alone. Figures stood beside her, their forms glowing faintly, their hands raised toward the obelisk. The city wasn't just calling her, it was calling for help. The vision ended, and Marina staggered back, gasping for breath. The cavern came into focus around her, the spheres glow steady and calm. Henry rushed to her side, his face etched with worry. "What happened?" he demanded. "Are you okay?" "Okay," Marina nodded, though her body felt weak. "It showed me the end and the beginning." The city was fighting the shadow, trying to hold it back. The people, they gave everything to protect it, and now it's happening again. Henry's happening again. Henry's happening again. Expression darkened. "You're saying the shadow is coming back?" Marina met his gaze, her voice steady despite the fear in her chest. "It never left. The ruins aren't just remnants of the past. They're preparing for the future, and we're a part of it." The cavern's hum grew louder. The spheres light, intensifying. The pools of liquid light began to ripple, their surfaces shimmering with energy. Marina felt the weight of the city's presence pressing down on her, urging her to act. The ruins had chosen her for a reason, and she couldn't walk away. Marina stood in the cavern, the pulsating sphere before her and the shimmering pools at her feet, reflecting the glow like fractured mirrors. The energy in the space was palpable, wrapping around her like a heavy electric fog. She felt the ruins drawing her deeper into their web, a mix of invitation and warning in every flicker of light and vibration of sound. Henry's presence beside her was grounding, though she could sense his unease. His breathing was uneven, his flashlight darting across the vast chamber, searching for anything that might explain the growing intensity around them. "This place," he murmured, "it feels alive. It's like it's watching us." "It is," Marina replied, her voice steady but low. "It's a light, tyrannous, at central theory. It's amazing. It's low, steady but low. More than a place. It's a memory, a weapon, and a guardian, all at once." Her words seemed to hang in the air, absorbed by the humming energy of the cavern. The sphere before them brightened momentarily, then dimmed again, as if responding to her acknowledgement. Marina reached out toward it once more, her hand trembling slightly. She wasn't sure if it was fear or the overwhelming gravity of the moment that caused her hesitation. This time, the sphere's surface felt warmer, almost welcoming. As her fingers brushed against it, the visions came again, not as fragmented flashes, but as a steady flow of images and sensations. Marina felt herself being pulled into the city story, deeper than before. She was standing at the edge of the city, looking out over an endless expanse of ocean. The horizon was dark, but not from a lack of light. It was the shadow. It crept forward like a living entity, its tendrils curling and twisting as they reached for the city. There, people around her moved with urgency, their voices rising in a symphony of prayer and determination. She could feel their fear, but also their resolve. The obelisk in the city center began to glow, its symbols coming alive with a fierce intensity. Beams of light shot upward, piercing the darkened sky, creating a barrier that held the shadow at bay for a time. Marina could sense the strain in the city's defenses, as if the very fabric of its existence was being stretched to its limit. And then the barrier faltered. The shadow pushed forward, its tendrils breaching the light and wrapping around the city's tallest towers. The people didn't scream or flee. They stood their ground, their hands raised toward the obelisk in a final act of defiance. Their bodies dissolved into light, their energy absorbed by the structures they had built to protect their home. Marina felt their sacrifice as though it were her own a searing pain that gave way to an overwhelming sense of purpose. The obelisk flared one last time, sending a pulse of energy outward that drove the shadow back, but not away. The wave of darkness receded, retreating into the depths, waiting for the moment when it could return. And now, it was returning. Marina snapped back to the present, gasping as the vision released her. The sphere's glow dimmed, but the energy in the cavern remained charged, almost alive. Henry was by her side, his hand on her shoulder, his face pale. "Marina," he said, his voice shaky. "What did you see?" "It's coming back," she said, her words tumbling out in a rush. "The shadow. It's been waiting, and now it's waking up. The city, it was a last stand. The people sacrificed everything to hold it off. But it wasn't enough. They knew it would return, and they built this," she gestured to the cavern around them, "to fight it again." Henry looked around, his expression torn between disbelief and dread. "How do we fight something like that? This isn't just a storm or an earthquake, it's alive." Marina shook her head. "I don't know, but the ruins, though, the obelisk, the sphere, the sarcophagi, they're all part of the answer. We just have to figure out how to activate them." A sudden vibration shook the cavern, sending ripples across the pools of light. The hum grew louder, deeper, resonating through their bodies like a drumbeat. Marina steadied herself, her heart racing. The city was responding to her thoughts, its energy shifting and intensifying. "Something's happening," Henry said, his voice rising over the growing noise. "We need to move." Before Marina could reply, the pools of light began to rise, their liquid forms twisting into delicate, sinuous shapes. They hovered in the air, shimmering like molten glass, their movements synchronized with the rhythm of the hum. Marina watched, mesmerized, as the shapes formed patterns intricate, swirling designs that mirrored the carvings on and the walls and the obelisk. "It's trying to show us something," she said, stepping closer to one of the glowing shapes. The liquid light shifted again, its patterns becoming more deliberate. Marina recognized fragments of the symbols she had, seen in the vision's marks of protection, energy, and binding. The shapes were a map, a guide to the city's defenses. "It's a sequence," she realized, her voice filled with awe. "These are the steps to reawaken the city's power." Henry looked at her, his expression a mix of hope and fear. "But what happens when we do? What if we wake up the shadow too?" Marina met his gaze, her resolve hardening. "We don't have a choice. If we don't act, it will wake on its own and there will be nothing to stop it." The glowing patterns floated in the air, shifting like living threads of light, their movements purposeful and rhythmic. Marina felt the energy pulsing around her, resonating with the cavern's deep hum. The symbols seemed to respond to her presence, bending and weaving as if guiding her toward the answers she sought. Yet, with that shout, every step closer, a shadow of unease crept into her chest. Henry remained by her side, his gaze darting between Marina and the luminous shapes. His breath was shallow, his hands clenched tightly at his sides. "What if we're wrong?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if activating this brings the shadow closer instead of holding it back?" Marina hesitated, her mind racing with the same question. The visions had shown her both hope and destruction, the city's defenses holding against the shadow and its eventual collapse. The ruins had chosen her for a reason, but she didn't yet know if she was part of the solution or the trigger. "We won't know unless we try," she said finally, her voice steadier than she felt. "If the shadow is waking, it's already too late to turn back." Henry exhaled sharply, but he nodded. Resolve hardening. "Then let's do it." The glowing patterns guided them toward the far end of the cavern, where a smaller, circular chamber awaited. Its entrance was framed by intricate carvings that pulsed faintly, their light casting dancing shadows across the stone. As Marina stepped inside, the hum grew louder, filling the space with a deep, resonant vibration. It was as if the city itself were alive, breathing in anticipation. At the center of the chamber stood a pedestal. Its surface engraved with symbols that mirrored those floating in the air. Above it hovered another sphere, smaller than the one in the main cavern, but equally luminous. Its light was softer, more subdued, and it pulsed in time with the carvings on the walls. Marina approached the pedestal cautiously, her heart pounding. The sphere seemed to react to her presence, its glow intensifying as she reached out. Her fingers brushed against its surface, and the familiar warmth flooded through her once more. But this time, the vision was different. She saw the city again, but not as it had been in the past. This time, it was the ruins, bathed in a dim, flickering light. The obelisk stood tall but fractured, its symbols faint and broken. The sarcophagi glowed faintly, their energy waning, and beyond them, the shadow loomed, its tendrils reaching hungrily toward the city's heart. But there was something else, something new. Figures stood among the ruins, their forms indistinct but unmistakably human. They moved with purpose, their hands tracing the carvings on the walls, their voices rising in a chant that resonated with the hum of the city. The obelisk began to glow brighter, its light spreading outward, in rippling waves. The shadow recoiled, its movements hesitant and fragmented. The vision shifted, focusing on one of the figures. Marina gasped as she recognized herself. Standing at the obelisk's base, her hands raised toward its glowing surface. The light around her was blinding, but she didn't falter. She could feel the city's power coursing through her, merging with her own energy. It wasn't just the city fighting the shadow, it was them, together. The vision ended abruptly, and Marina staggered back, her breath ragged. Henry caught her arm, steadying her as she regained her footing. "What did you see?" he asked, his voice urgent. Marina's gaze was distant, her thoughts racing. "It's us," she said final. "We're part of this. The city needs us to activate its defenses, to complete the cycle. It's been waiting for someone to understand, to connect with it." Henry's jaw tightened. "And the shadow? It's afraid of the city," Marina said, "but it's not defeated. If we don't act, it will consume everything." The sphere above the pedestal began to pulse more rapidly, its light spreading across the chamber. The symbols on the walls flared to life, their patterns shifting and merging into a cohesive sequence. Marina felt a jolt of understanding. It was a key, a set of instructions to reawaken the city's power. She turned to Henry, her eyes alight with determination. "We have to activate the obelisk. It's the city's heart, its core. If we can restore it, we might have a chance." The journey back to the obelisk was fraught with tension. The glowing patterns followed them, their light illuminating the path like a silent guide. The hum grew louder with each step, resonating through the ruins like a heartbeat. Marina felt the weight of the city's expectation pressing down on her, a mix of hope and urgency. When they reached the obelisk, its symbols were flickering weakly, their light dim and uneven. Marina approached it, her hand trembling as she placed it against the cool stone. The warmth surged through her again, stronger this time, filling her with a sense of connection. "The symbols," Henry said, pointing to the patterns floating around them. "They're aligning with the obelisk. It's like it's waiting for a signal." Marina closed her eyes, focusing on the hum that filled the air. She could feel the city's energy flowing through her, guiding her movements slowly, deliberately. She began tracing the symbols on the obelisk. her fingers moving in rhythm with the patterns around her. The obelisk's light grew steadier, its symbols glowing brighter as the sequence unfolded. The hum intensified, becoming a resonant roar that filled the cavern. Marina felt the energy building, the city awakening beneath her touch. And then, with a blinding flash, the obelisk came to life. The ruins shook as the light spread outward, flowing through the pathways and walls like a pulse of electricity. The sarcophagi flared brightly, their energy merging with the obelisk's glow. The shadow, still distant but looming, seemed to hesitate, its tendrils retreating slightly. Marina staggered back, her body trembling from the exertion. Henry was at her side, his eyes wide with awe as he watched the city's transformation. "It's working," he said, his voice barely audible over the roar of energy. "You did it." But Marina shook her head, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The shadow wasn't gone. It was watching, waiting, its presence a dark stain on the edge of her vision. "This is just the beginning," she said, her voice steady and despite the fear in her chest. "The city is awake, but so is the shadow." The light emanating from the obelisk illuminated the surrounding ruins, its brilliance cutting through the dark depths of the ocean. The symbols pulsed rhythmically now. No, longer chaotic or fading, but vibrant and steady. Marina stood transfixed, her body still trembling from the surge of energy she had channeled into the city's core. The ruins seemed to hum in response, their ancient stone and coral-covered structures alive with an energy that hadn't stirred for millennia. Henry pulled her back a step, his hand gripping her arm as the vibrations around them intensified. "The city's changing," he murmured, his voice filled with awe and trepidation. Marina nodded, her gaze fixed on the obelisk. "It's waking up." The ruins around them began to shift subtly, as though the city itself were breathing. Pathways that had been choked with debris cleared, their stones realigning into intricate patterns. Towers that had crumbled partially to the seabed now glowed faintly, their jagged silhouettes transformed into luminous beacons. It was as though the city was remembering itself, restoring what had been lost. Marina took a tentative step forward, her eyes scanning the ruins. The light of the obelisk spread outward in waves, illuminating areas that had remained hidden in shadow. And yet, the weight in her chest, the sense of something looming, watching, only grew stronger. "It's not over," she said softly, more to herself than to Henry. "The shadow, it's still here. It's waiting." Henry glanced toward the distant edge of the ruins, where the faint, oppressive darkness still lingered like a storm cloud. "If the obelisk is awake," he said carefully, "then maybe the city's defenses can stop it." Marina hesitated. The visions had shown her the city's last stand, its people pouring everything they had into holding the shadow at bay, but its people pouring everything they had into holding the shadow at bay. But it hadn't been enough. What had changed now? What was the city expecting of her? The glow from the obelisk intensified, sending another pulse of light rippling through the ruins. Marina felt the energy shift around her, a sense of urgency woven into the vibrations. The floating patterns of light returned, hovering near the obelisk and forming a spiral that seemed to point toward a specific direction, a pathway leading deeper into the city. Marina's heart raced. She could feel the pull again, the same force that had drawn her to the ruins in the first place. "Its eyes, showing us something," she said, already moving toward the path. Henry hesitated. "Are you sure this is a good idea? The obelisk is active now. Shouldn't we wait? See what happens?" Marina shook her head. "The city isn't just telling us to activate its defenses. It's guiding us toward something Something it needs us to do, Henry sighed. But he didn't argue. He followed her, his flashlight cutting through the water as they moved deeper into the ruins. The pathway ahead was smoother than the others, its stone polished and glowing faintly under the obelisk's light. The carvings on the walls were more intricate here, their symbols interwoven into patterns that seemed etched, almost alive. As they walked, Marina felt the weight of the city's presence pressing down on her. It wasn't oppressive, but it was overwhelming, an ancient intelligence watching her, judging her, guiding her steps. The hum grew louder, resonating in her chest and making the water around them vibrate faintly. The path ended in a large circular chamber, its ceiling high and vaulted. In the center of the space stood a second obelisk, smaller than the first but equally radiant. Surrounding it were more sarcophagi, their surfaces glowing with a faint, rhythmic pulse. The energy in the room was almost tangible, a charged atmosphere that made the hair on the back of Marina's neck stand on end. "This is it," she said, her voice barely audible. "This is what the city wanted us to find." Henry approached one of the sarcophagi, his flashlight revealing the intricate carvings on its surface. "These look newer," he said, his brow furrowed. "They're different from the ones in the main chamber." Marina stepped closer, her eyes scanning the symbols. He was right, the carvings were less worn, their patterns sharper and more precise. It was as though these sarcophagi had been created after the others, their purpose distinct. As she studied the nearest one, the carvings began to shift, rearranging themselves into a glowing spiral. The hum in the chamber intensified, and the light from the obelisk grew brighter. Marina stepped back instinctively as the sarcophagus began to open. The lid slid away smoothly, revealing not emptiness, but a figure suspended in a faintly glowing liquid. The being inside was humanoid, but not entirely human, its features elongated, its eyes closed, and its skin shimmering faintly under the obelisk's light. Marina felt her breath catch in her throat. This wasn't a statue or a relic. It was alive. Henry swore under his breath, his flashlight shaking slightly as he pointed it toward the figure. Is it one of them?" Marina nodded slowly. "It has to be. They didn't just seal themselves away to preserve their memories. They preserved themselves." The figure's eyes opened suddenly, revealing orbs of pure light. Marina froze as the being turned its gaze toward her, its expression calm but intense. She felt the same presence she had sensed in the Guardian. But this was different, stronger, more direct. The being stepped out of the sarcophagus, the liquid draining away as its feet touched the ground. It moved with a fluid grace, its luminous eyes never leaving Marina. She felt a wave of emotion wash over her: gratitude, curiosity, and something deeper, something she couldn't quite name. The being raised a hand, and the symbols on the walls flared to life. The second obelisk pulsed brightly, its light spreading outward in rippling waves that seemed to resonate with the first. Marina felt the energy building again, the city's defenses aligning, preparing for something imminent. And then she heard the voice, not in her mind, but in the air around her. It was soft but resonant, its tone steady and commanding. "The shadow awakens. Will you stand with us?" Marina felt the weight of the being's question settle over her like a shroud. "Will you stand with us?" The words weren't just a request, they were a challenge, a test of her resolve. The being's luminous gaze bore into her, not with malice, but with an intensity that demanded honesty. "Yes," she said finally, her voice steady despite the turmoil. Inside her, "I'll stand with you." The being tilted its head slightly, as if acknowledging her answer. Its hand remained raised, and the light from the second obelisk grew brighter, spreading outward in synchronized waves. The carvings on the old coal obey ivories. Walls pulsed in rhythm, their patterns shifting and aligning like pieces of a puzzle falling into place. Marina could feel the energy in the chamber growing stronger, its hum vibrating through her very core. Henry stood behind her. His several Angikaris, hen expression, a mixture of awe and apprehension. Marina, he said cautiously, are we sure about this? What if activating all this just wakes up the shadow faster? Marina turned to him, her eyes unwavering. If we don't, it's going to wake up anyway. The city wasn't built to hide, it was built to fight. We have to trust it. Henry hesitated but nodded. Then let's finish this. The being moved toward the Fetlealoi central obelisk, its steps silent but deliberate. It gestured for Marina to follow, and she obeyed, her curiosity outweighing her fear. As she approached, the obelisk's symbols flared brightly, their light illuminating the entire chamber. Being placed its hand on the obelisk's surface, and Marina instinctively mirrored the gesture. The moment her palm touched the stone, a surge of energy coursed through her. It wasn't painful, but it was overwhelming, like standing in the heart of a storm. The chamber around her seemed to dissolve, and she was pulled into another vision. This time, the vision was different. She wasn't standing in the past or witnessing the city's final moments. She was in the present, but it wasn't just the ruins she saw. The shadow loomed closer now, its tendrils stretching toward the city, curling and twisting as if testing the defenses. The obelisks glowed brightly, their light holding the darkness at bay. But the shadow was holding the darkness at bay, relentless. It wasn't just trying to consume the city, it was searching for something, for someone. And then Maria saw herself again, standing at the heart of the city. But she wasn't alone. The being was beside her, along with others, figures she didn't recognize but who radiated the same luminous energy. They stood together, their hands raised toward the obelisks, channeling the city's power. The light grew brighter, stronger, pushing the shadow back, but the shadow didn't retreat fully. It lingered on the edges, waiting, watching. The vision ended, and Marina gasped as she was pulled back into the chamber. Her knees buckled, and Henry caught her before she could fall. The being stepped back from the obelisk, its dead expression unreadable, but its presence steady. "What did you see?" Henry asked, his voice tight with concern. Marina steadied herself, her breath ragged. "The shadow is closer than we thought," she said. "The city's defenses are holding it back. But they won't hold forever. It's searching for me, for us." Henry's eyes widened. "For us? Why? I don't know," Marina admitted. "But the city thinks we can stop it. It needs us to stand with it." The being raised its hand again, and the symbols on the obelisk shifted, forming a new sequence. Marina watched as the patterns aligned, their roar, ikateering their eye, light growing brighter until the chamber was bathed in an otherworldly glow. The hum in the air intensified, resonating through the walls and the floor, vibrating in Marina's chest like a second heartbeat. The sarcophagi surrounding the obelisk began to stir. Their lids slid open one by one, revealing more figures, each suspended in the same glowing liquid. As the liquid drained away, the figures stepped out, their movements graceful and deliberate. They joined the first being, their luminous eyes focused on Marina and Henry. The first being spoke again, its voice calm but commanding. "The defenses are restored, but they are not enough. The shadow will test them. You must stand with us to ensure they hold." Marina swallowed hard, her heart pounding. "How? What do we have to do?" The being gestured toward the obelisk. "Your connection to the city is strong, stronger than ours. You must channel its energy, guide its defenses. It will listen to you." Marina's breath caught in her throat. The idea of channeling the city's energy of standing at the center of its defenses was overwhelming, but she couldn't turn away. The visions, the call of the ruins, the pull she had felt from the moment she had arrived, it had all led to this. "He'll do it," she said. "Her do it," she said. Her voice steady. "Tell me what I need to do." The beings formed a circle around the obelisk, their hands raised, as they began to chant in a language Marina didn't understand. The symbols on the walls and the obelisk pulsed in time with their voices, their light growing brighter with each word. Marina stepped forward, placing both hands on the obelisk. The moment her palms touched its surface, a surge of energy flooded through her, more powerful than anything she had felt before. Her vision blurred, and the ruins around her seemed to fade. She could see the city as a whole now, its pathways and towers glowing with light, its defenses rippling outward like waves. The shadow loomed at the edges, testing the barrier with its tendrils, but the city held firm. Marina focused, her thoughts aligning with the energy of the obelisk. She could feel the city responding to her, its power flowing through her like a river. The beings around her chanted louder, their rivers' voices merging with the hum of the ruins, creating a resonance that seemed to shake the very fabric of the ocean. The shadow hesitated. For the first time, Marina felt it falter, its movements less confident, less sure, but it didn't retreat. Instead, it shifted, its tendrils curling inward as though gathering strength. And then it struck. The shadow's tendrils lashed out, striking the barrier of light surrounding the city with a force that reverberated through the water like Marina felt the impact deep in her chest, as though the blow had struck her directly. The obelisk flared in response, its light surging outward in rippling waves, but the shadow didn't retreat. Instead, it pressed harder. Its movements growing more frantic and aggressive. The beings around Marina raised their hands higher, their chants intensifying. The light from the sarcophagi brightened, merging with the glow of the obelisk. The carvings on the walls pulsed rapidly, their patterns shifting as though adjusting to the attack. Marina gritted her teeth, her hands gripping the obelisk tightly. The energy coursing through her was almost overwhelming, a tidal wave of power that threatened to consume her. She closed her eyes, focusing on the hum of the ruins, the rhythm that had guided her from the moment she had arrived. The city wasn't just defending itself, it was reaching out, drawing on her connection to stabilize its defenses. "I can feel its defenses. She said, her voice strained. "It's pushing harder. The defenses are holding, but they won't last if it keeps this up." Henry's voice crackled through her headset. "Then we need to find a way to weaken it. The obelisk is strong, but it can't do this forever. What else does the city have?" Marina opened her eyes, scanning the chamber. The sarcophagi were still glowing, their energy feeding into the obelisk, but the strain was visible. The symbols on the walls flickered faintly, their light faltering under the shadow's relentless assault, and then she saw it, a faint glow emanating from the far side of the chamber. It was small, almost imperceptible, but it pulsed in time with the obelisk's light. Marina felt a tug, an instinctual pull that told her this was important. "There's something else," she said, stepping away from the obelisk. "Another source of energy. It's connected to the defenses." The lead being turned toward her, its luminous eyes following her movements. It didn't speak, but Marina could feel its approval, its trust in her judgment. She moved toward the glow, her heart pounding as she approached. The glow led her to a smaller pedestal, its surface etched with symbols similar to those on the obelisk. At its center rested a shard of crystal, its edges jagged but radiating a soft, steady light. Marina reached out, her fingers brushing against the crystal. The moment she touched it, a new wave of energy surged through her, different from the obelisk's power, sharper, more focused. Visions flooded her mind, faster and more fragmented than before. She saw the shadow retreating, its tendrils severed by beams of light. She saw the obelisk flaring brightly, its energy amplified by the crystal. And she saw the obelisk flaring brightly, its energy amplified by the crystal. And she saw herself holding the shard, channeling its power into the city's defenses. "This is it," she whispered. "This is what we need." She turned to Henry, her voice urgent. "The shard amplifies the obelisk if I can connect it to the city's defenses. We can push the shadow back." Henry frowned, his expression uncertain. "And how do we do that?" Marina hesitated. The visions had shown her the process, but it wasn't clear. The shard's energy was raw, untamed, and merging it with the obelisk would be dangerous, but there was no other option. "We'll figure it out," she said. Just stay close." The shard's light grew brighter as Marina carried it back to the obelisk. The beings around her watched in silence, their chants fading as they stepped aside to let her through. The obelisk seemed to react to the shard's presence, its light flaring briefly before settling into a steady pulse. Marina placed the shard against the obelisk's surface, her hands trembling as she aligned it with the glowing symbols. The moment the shard made contact, a surge of energy exploded outward, shaking the chamber and sending ripples through the water. The obelisk's light intensified, its symbols glowing with a blinding brilliance. The hum in the chamber grew louder, resonating through the ruins with a power that seemed to shake the very foundation of the city. The shadow recoiled, its tendrils retreating as the light spread outward in rippling waves. "It's working," Henry said, his voice filled with awe. "You're doing it." But Marina wasn't so sure. The shard's energy was wild, unpredictable, and she could feel it pushing against the obelisk structure. The city was holding for now, but the strain was evident. If the energy wasn't stabilized, it could overwhelm the defenses entirely. The fat shadow wasn't retreating fully. It lingered at the edges of the light, its tendrils curling and twisting as though searching for a weakness. Marina could feel its presence, cold and malevolent, probing the city's defenses. It wasn't just defenses. It wasn't just attacking, it was learning. "We have to stabilize the energy," she said, her voice strained. "The shard is too strong for the obelisk to handle on its own." The lead being stepped forward, its luminous gaze fixed on her. It raised its hand, and the symbols on the walls began to shift again, forming new patterns that spread across the chamber. Marina felt the energy around her realign, the hum deepening into a steady, resonant tone. The being placed its hand over hers, guiding her movements as she adjusted the shard's position on the obelisk. The symbols flared brighter, their light merging with the shard's glow. The energy in the chamber stabilized, its vibrations evening out into a harmonious rhythm. The shadow struck again, its tendrils lashing out with renewed fury, but this time, the city's defenses held firm. The light from the obelisk surged outward, cutting through the darkness and driving the shadow back. Marina felt the energy flowing through her, a powerful current that connected her to the city and its defenses. The obelisk's light grew brighter, spreading across the ruins and illuminating every corner of the city. The shadow retreated further, its presence shrinking into the distance. For the first time, Marina felt hope. The obelisk's light surged like a tidal wave, spreading across the ruins and cutting deep into the shadow's encroaching form. For a moment, it seemed as though the city had gained the upper hand. The tendrils recoiled violently, retreating to the edges of the ruins, where the darkness coiled like a wounded beast. But Marina knew it wasn't defeated, it was regrouping, observing, waiting for its next strike. The shard in her hand vibrated, faintly, its energy stabilizing under the obelisk's glow. Marina felt the strain in her body easing, though her mind was still racing. The connection between her and the city had deepened. She could feel its ancient intelligence pulsing around her, merging with her thoughts. It wasn't just guiding her, it was listening, responding to her instincts. "We pushed it back," Henry said, his voice breaking the tense silence. "But it's not gone." Marina nodded, her eyes fixed on the great distant shadows. "It's learning. It's testing the defenses, looking for weaknesses. We've bought ourselves time, but not much." The lead being stepped forward, its luminous form casting long shadows across the chamber. It gestured toward the bell shard in Marina's hand, its expression unreadable when it spoke. Its voice was steady and deliberate. "The first barrier holds, but the shadow will adapt. The city's defenses must evolve." Marina's brow furrowed. "Evolve how?" "The obelisk is holding, but it can't sustain this forever." The being tilted its head slightly, as though considering her question. "The obelisk is one piece of the whole. The others must awaken." "The others?" Marina echoed, glancing at Henry. Elisa's voice crackled through the comms, her tone urgent. "Marina, I'm picking up something on the sonar. There's another structure, no, multiple structures surrounding the ruins. They're aligned in a pattern like a grid." Marina's pulse quickened. "The city isn't just one location," she said, realization dawning. "It's a network. The obelisk is the heart, but the other structures, they're the veins. They're connected." Henry frowned. "If that's true, then activating the others could strengthen the defenses, but it could also draw the shadow's attention to the entire network." Marina met his gaze, her jaw tightening. "It's a risk we have to take. If the shadow breaks through here, it won't stop. The whole city will fall." The lead being stepped aside, gesturing toward an exit on the far side of the chamber. The light from the carvings extended into the passage, illuminating the way forward. Marinating the way forward, felt the pull again, the same instinctive force that had guided her to the shard. The city was calling her deeper into its network, urging her to complete what she had started. The passage was narrower than the others, its walls smooth and unbroken. The hum that had permeated the ruins grew softer here, more subdued, as though the city were conserving its energy. Marina and Henry moved carefully, their flashlights casting long shadows ahead of them. "This place feels different," Henry said, his voice low. "It's quieter." Marina nodded. "It's waiting." The passage opened into another chamber, smaller but no less impressive than the others. At its center stood a pedestal similar to the one that had held the Karayan. At its rising, a traced, At its center stood a pedestal similar to the one that had held the shard, but this one was empty. Surrounding it were 4 smaller obelisks, their surfaces dark and inert. "These must be the others," Marina said, stepping closer. "The secondary defenses." Henry examined one of the smaller obelisks, his hand brushing over its smooth surface. "They're not active. How do we turn them on?" Marina studied the pedestal, her fingers tracing the faint carvings etched into its surface. The patterns were similar to those on the shard, but more intricate, more layered. She could feel the energy beneath the stone, dormant but waiting to be awakened. She placed the shard in the center of the pedestal. The moment it made contact, the carvings flared to life, their light spreading outward in rippling waves. The smaller obelisks began to glow faintly, their symbols flickering like embers struggling to ignite. It's working, Marina said, her voice filled with cautious optimism. The shard is activating the network, but the light faltered, the glow dimming as quickly as it had appeared. Marina frowned, her hand resting as it had appeared on the pedestal. The energy felt fragmented, incomplete, as though something vital was missing. It's not enough, she muttered. The shard needs more power to activate the entire network. Henry pointed to the walls, where new symbols had begun to glow faintly. What about those? They look like the ones in the main chamber. Marina followed his gaze. The symbols were indeed familiar, their patterns forming a spiral that mirrored the carvings on the obelisk. She felt the pull again, the instinct that had guided her through every step of the ruins. We need to align them, she said. The symbols are part of the activation sequence. Working quickly, Marina and Henry traced the glowing symbols, their movements synchronized with the hum of the chamber, a sum of the chamber. As the final symbol was aligned, the shard flared brightly, its light spreading outward in a cascade of energy. The smaller obelisks roared to life, their symbols glowing with a steady brilliance. The hum deepened, vibrating through the chamber as the energy flowed into the network. Marina could feel it spreading, reaching out to the other structures Elise had detected. The city's defenses were evolving, their strength growing with each connection. But the shadow wasn't idle. The tendrils at the edge of the ruins began to writhe, their movements frantic and agitated. The darkness surged forward, striking the barrier with renewed force. The obelisk's light held firm, but the strain was visible. The carvings on its surface flickered, their patterns destabilizing under the pressure. Marina felt the tension in the air, the city's energy vibrating with a sense of urgency. The defenses were stronger now, but the shadow was relentless. It wouldn't stop until it found a way through. It's testing us, she said, her voice tight. It knows the defenses are growing, and it's trying to overwhelm them before they're complete. Henry's jaw clenched. Then we need to move faster. What's the next step? Marina glanced at the glowing obelisks, their light spreading outward like veins in a living organism. She could feel the network stabilizing, but there was still more to be done. The main obelisk is the heart, she said, but the network is the body. If we can connect the entire grid, the defenses might be strong enough to hold. She turned toward the passage leading deeper into the ruins, the faint glow of symbols marking the way forward. There's more to this city than we've seen, and if we're going to stop the shadow, we need to find it. The symbols along the passageway ahead flickered faintly, their light casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. Marina felt her pulse quicken as she led the way. The hum of the city resonating in her chest like a second heartbeat. The air, or rather, the water around her seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that both guided and unsettled her. Henry followed close behind, his flashlight slicing through the gloom. He was silent, but Marina could sense his unease. The strain of the shadow's relentless attacks and the weight of their discoveries hung heavy between them. The passage opened into another chamber, larger and more ornate than the others. Massive columns lined the walls, their surfaces carved with intricate symbols that pulsed faintly with light. At the center of the room was a raised platform, surrounded by what appeared to be an array of smaller devices round, crystal-like structures that hovered just above the ground, their surfaces glowing faintly. Marina approached the platform cautiously, her gaze fixed on the largest of the glowing crystals. It pulsed faintly, its rhythm slower than the obelisk's but deeply resonant. She reached out, her fingers brushing its surface, and felt the now familiar surge of energy flood through her. Visions filled her mind again, faster and more fragmented than before. She saw the grid of obelisks stretching across the city, their light connected in intricate patterns. She saw the shadows striking again and again, its tendrils probing the defenses, searching for weaknesses, and she saw something new, a central point, deeper within the ruins, where the city's power converged. The core, she murmured, pulling her hand back. There's a core. It's the key to everything. Henry stepped closer, his brow furrowed. The core, what does that mean? Marina turned to him, her expression intense. The obelisks and the shard, they're part of the network, but they're not the source. The city has a core, a central node where its energy is concentrated. If we can reach it, we might be able to amplify the defenses and push the shadow back for good. Henry's face darkened. Or we might trigger something we don't understand. Marina hesitated, her mind racing. The risks were undeniable, but the shadow's presence was growing stronger. With each passing moment, if they didn't act, the city's defenses would eventually fail, and with them, any hope of containing the shadow. We don't have a choice, she said finally. The city brought us here for a reason. It's guiding us to the core because it knows we're the only ones who can activate it. The symbols on the walls flared to life, their light forming a pathway that led deeper into the ruins. Marina felt the pull again, the instinctive force that had guided her. Through every step of the city, she followed it, her movements deliberate but steady. Henry stayed close, his flashlight casting shifting beams across the ancient stone. The passage narrowed as they descended, the carvings on the walls growing more intricate and complex. The hum of the city deepened, vibrating through the stone and water, as though the ruins themselves were alive. Marina could feel the tension in the air, a sense of anticipation that made her heart race at last. They emerged into a vast, domed chamber. The ceiling stretched high above them, its surface covered in swirling patterns of light that seemed to move and shift like living things. At the center of the chamber was the core, a massive crystalline structure, suspended in midair by invisible forces. Its surface pulsed with a deep, resonant glow, brighter and more powerful than anything Marina had seen before. "This is it," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "The heart of the city." Henry's breath caught in his throat as he took in the sight. "It's incredible." The core seemed to respond to their presence, its light growing brighter as they approached. Marina could feel its energy reaching out to her, wrapping around her like a warm current. It wasn't just power, it was knowledge, a deep and ancient intelligence that had been waiting for this moment. She placed her hand on the core, and the visions came again. This time, the images were sharper, more vivid. She saw the city in its prime, its towers gleaming under the ocean's surface, its people thriving in harmony with their environment. She saw the shadow's first attack, its darkness consuming everything in its path, and the desperate measures taken to contain it. The core had been their final creation, a last-ditch effort to protect what remained of their civilization. It wasn't just a power source, it was a weapon, designed to channel the city's energy into a concentrated force capable of driving the shadow back. But the cost had been immense. The people had sacrificed themselves to activate it, their essence becoming part of the city's defenses, and now it was calling on Marina to do the same. The vision ended, and Marina pulled her hand back, her breath ragged. The core's light pulsed steadily, its energy radiating through the chamber. "It's a weapon," she said, turning to Henry. "The core is designed to channel the city's energy into a single, focused strike. It's how they fought the shadow before." Henry's expression was grim. "And it didn't work." Marina shook her head. "It worked temporarily, but they didn't have enough time to finish what they started." Retreated. but it wasn't destroyed. The core is the only thing powerful enough to stop it. Henry hesitated, his eyes flickering between Marina and the core. And what happens if we activate it? Do we end up like them? Marina didn't answer. The visions had shown her the cost of using the core, the lives sacrificed to fuel its power. The city left empty and silent, but the alternative was unthinkable. If the shadow broke through, it wouldn't stop at the ruins, it would consume everything. We don't have a choice, she said finally, her voice steady. We have to finish what they started. As Marina approached the core, the symbols on its surface began to shift, aligning into patterns that mirrored those on the obelisks. The light in the chamber intensified, spreading outward in rippling waves that resonated with the hum of the city. Marina could feel the energy building, the core awakening under her touch. The shadow struck again, its tendrils lashing out with a ferocity that shook the ruins. The obelisks flared brightly, their defenses holding, but Marina could feel the strain. The city was running out of time. She placed both hands on the core, her mind merging with its energy. The light around her grew blinding, enveloping her in a sea of brilliance. She could feel the city's power flowing through her, merging with her own energy, amplifying it into something extraordinary. And then she felt the shadow push back. It was no longer probing or testing, it was attacking. Its full force slamming against the city's defenses. The obelisks flickered, their light dimming under the onslaught. Marina gritted her teeth, focusing all her energy on the core. The city responded, its defenses surging with renewed strength. But the shadow wasn't retreating. The shadow's assault was relentless, its tendrils slamming against the glowing barrier with a force that shook the entire city. The hum of theos. A thick ruins grew discordant, its rhythm breaking as the defenses strained under the pressure. Marina stood at the core, her hands pressed against its radiant surface, every muscle in her body trembling from the surge of energy coursing through her. The beings encircling the chamber raised their hands, their chants rising in unison. Their luminous forms glowed brighter, their energy flowing into the core, amplifying its power. The carvings on the walls pulsed in time with the chanting, their light spreading outward in rippling waves. The obelisks responded, their symbols flaring brightly as the network stabilized. But the shadow was adapting. It's pushing harder, Henry said, his voice tight with urgency. The obelisks are territory, the obelisks are holding, but they can't keep this up forever. Marina clenched her teeth, her gaze fixed on the swirling patterns of light within the core. She could feel its power building, its energy merging with hers, but the strain was immense. The city wasn't just using her as a conduit, it was relying on her to guide its defenses, to channel its energy into a coordinated strike. The shadow struck again, its tendrils piercing the barrier and wrapping around one of the smaller obelisks. The structure flickered, its light dimming as the shadow's darkness seeped into its core. Marina felt the disruption immediately, a jarring ripple that spread through the network like a crack in a glass pane. It's targeting the obelisks! It's targeting the obelisks! She shouted. If we lose them, the whole defense will collapse. Henry's face paled. Then what do we do? Marina closed her eyes, focusing on the hum of the city. The core's energy was overwhelming, but it wasn't chaotic. It was alive, responsive, waiting for her to direct it. She took a deep breath, her thoughts aligning with the rhythm of Theta. Ruins, we fight back, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. The city's power isn't just defensive, it's offensive. We have to use it. The beings around her seemed to respond to her determination. Their chanting grew determination, louder, their movements synchronized as they directed their energy into the core. The shard in the pedestal flared brightly, its light merging with the core's glow. Marina felt the city's power surging through her. a tidal wave of energy that made her heart race and her mind sharpen. She raised her hands, the light from the core flowing into her like a river. The carvings on the walls shifted, their symbols aligning into a new sequence. Marina felt the energy around her condense. Focusing into a single point at the core center. "Marina," Henry called out, his voice filled with alarm. "The shadow, it's coming straight for us?" Marina opened her eyes, her vision blazing with light. The shadow was no longer probing or testing, it was advancing, its massive form coiling around the ruins. The tendrils that had struck the smaller obelisk now lashed out toward the core itself, their movements fast and precise. But Marina was ready. The core's light flared as she directed its energy outward, a brilliant beam that cut through the darkness like a blade. The tendrils recoiled violently, their edges disintegrating under the force of the attack. The shadow hesitated, its movements faltering as the city's defenses pushed back with a strength it hadn't anticipated. Marina didn't stop. She channeled the core's power into the obelisks, their light growing brighter as the network reawakened. The carvings on the walls pulsed in unison, their patterns forming a protective grid that surrounded the ruins. The shadow surged forward again, its tendrils coiling and twisting as they sought new points of purpose of weary showers. You ought 2 points of an artillery return entry. But the city's defenses were stronger now, their energy focused and coordinated. Each strike was met with a burst of light, the obelisks flaring brightly as they absorbed and redirected the attacks. "It's working," Henry said, his voice filled with cautious hope. "The defenses are holding." Marina nodded, her focus unbroken. She could feel the shadow's frustration, its movements growing more erratic as the city resisted its advance. But she also felt its intelligence, a dark, calculating presence that wasn't just attacking blindly. The shadow was learning, adapting, and it wouldn't stop until it found a way through. The core's energy continued to build, its glow so intense that the entire chamber was bathed in it. Light. Marina felt the strain in her body, her muscles trembling as she channeled the city's power. But she couldn't stop. The shadow was relentless, and the defenses needed her to maintain their strength. Unexpected. Instead of striking at the obelisks or the barrier, it recoiled, pulling its tendrils back into itself. The massive form shifted, its edges blurring as it began to condense. Marina's heart pounded as she watched, the light from the core reflecting off the swirling mass of darkness. "It's changing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. The shadow coiled tighter, its form shrinking until it was no larger than the core itself, and then it surged forward, moving faster than anything Marina had seen before. It struck the barrier directly, its condensed energy punching through the light and slamming into the core. The impact was like a thunderclap, a shock wave that rippled through the ruins and sent Marina sprawling. The core flickered, its light dimming as the shadow wrapped around it, its darkness seeping into the crystalline structure. "No, no!" Marina screamed, scrambling to her feet. She could feel the core's energy faltering, its rhythm breaking under the shadow's assault. The beings around her raised their hands, their chants growing louder as they directed their energy into the core. Marina joined them, her hands trembling as she reached for the light. The core responded weakly, its glow pulsing faintly as it fought against the shadow's grip. "You can't let it win!" Henry shouted, his voice desperate. "The city needs you, Marina." Marina closed her eyes, her mind merging with the core once more. She could feel its pain, its struggle, its determination to protect the city. The shadow's presence was overwhelming, but it wasn't invincible. It had weaknesses, fractures in it, its form that the city's energy could exploit. Taking a deep breath, Marina focused all her energy on the core. The shard flared brightly, its light merging with the core's glow. The obelisks responded, their symbols blazing as the network surged to life. The shadow recoiled, its grip on the core faltering as the city's defenses pushed back with renewed strength. Marina felt the energy around her condense, focusing into a single point at the core's center. The light grew brighter, stronger, until it was blinding, and then, with a final surge, the core unleashed its power. The release was cataclysmic. The core flared like a newborn star, its light ripping through the chamber and outward across the ruins. Marina shielded her eyes as the energy surged through her, her body trembling under the immense force. The obelisks across the city responded in kind, their symbols blazing with a unified brilliance. The carvings on the walls rippled with light, their patterns shifting into new configurations as the entire network came alive. The shadow reeled back, its condensed form unraveling in the face of the city's counterattack. Tendrils of darkness disintegrated under the onslaught, their edges disintegrated under the onslaught, fraying into nothingness. Marina could feel the shadow's pain, its frustration, its unwillingness to retreat. It lashed out wildly, its remaining tendrils slamming against the barrier, but the light held firm. For a moment, Marina allowed herself to hope. But then, as the light began to stabilize, the shadow did something she hadn't expected. It stopped moving. The darkness coiled in on itself, folding into a dense, compact sphere at the edge of the ruins. The swirling mass was smaller now, but its energy was more concentrated, more dangerous. Marina could feel it shifting, its presence growing heavier, darker, as though it were drawing strength from the very light that had pushed it back. "It's not retreating," Henry said, his voice filled with dread. "It's evolving." Marina's breath caught. She could sense the shift too, the shadow's energy condensing into something more precise, more deliberate. It wasn't lashing out blindly anymore, it was waiting, calculating. "The defenses are holding," Marina said, her voice steady despite the fear gnawing at her. "But it's not done. It's learning. It's changing." The Lee being stepped forward, its luminous form flickering faintly. Its voice resonated through the chamber, calm but urgent. "The shadow cannot be destroyed by light alone. Its essence is tied to the depths, to the balance of the ocean. The core can hold it at bay, but only if its connection is restored." "Restored?" Marina asked, her brow furrowing. "What do you mean?" The being gestured toward the core, its light dimming slightly as though conserving its energy. "The core draws its strength from the ocean, from the energy of life itself. The network is incomplete without this connection. You must find the source." Marina's heart sank. She had thought the obelisks and the shard were the key to the city's defenses, but now it was clear there was more, something deeper, something that tied the city to the ocean's vast power. "The source," she murmured. "Where is it?" The being pointed toward a newly revealed passage at the far end of the chamber. The symbols on its walls pulsed faintly, their light guiding the way. Marina felt the pull again, stronger this time, an unrelenting force that urged her forward. The new passage was unlike any they had encountered before. The carvings on its walls were older, more weathered, their patterns less structured. The hum of the city grew quieter here, replaced by a deep, resonant vibration that seemed to come from the ocean itself. The water felt heavier, denser, as though they were descending into the very heart of the ruins. Henry followed close behind, his movements tense but determined. "Are we sure this is a good idea?" he asked, his voice low. "The defenses are holding for now. If we go deeper, we might lose our connection to the obelisks." Marina shook her head. "City's telling us where to go. We have to trust it." The passage opened into a cavern unlike anything Marina had seen. The walls were covered in crystalline formations, that glowed softly, their light refracted through the water in shimmering patterns. At the center of the cavern was a massive structure, a pillar of stone and crystal that pulsed with a deep, steady rhythm. Marina approached cautiously, her heart pounding. The pillar's surface was covered in carvings, similar to those on the obelisks, but more intricate, more ancient. She placed her hand on its surface, and the energy that flowed through her was different, deeper, older, more primal. "It's alive," she said softly, her voice filled with awe. "This isn't justly." Her voice filled with awe. "Part of the city. It's part of the ocean itself." Henry frowned, his gaze scanning the cavern. "What does that mean? How does this help us stop the shadow?" Marina closed her eyes, focusing on the energy of the pillar. Visions came again, but these were different. They weren't of the city's past or its defenses, they were of the ocean itself. She saw currents flowing through vast, uncharted depths, teeming with life. She saw energy moving in patterns that mirrored the symbols on the obelisks, connecting the city to the ocean's natural rhythms. And she saw the shadow rising from the depths, a force of chaos and imbalance that threatened to consume everything. The vision ended, and Marina opened her eyes, her breath ragged. "The city was never meant to fight the shadow alone," she said. "It was part of the ocean, part of its balance. The shadow broke that balance, and the city's defenses weakened. If we want to stop it, we have to restore that connection." Henry stared at her, his expression a mix of fear and determination. "How do we do that?" Marina turned back to the pillar, her mind racing. The energy flowing through it was vast, powerful, but untapped. The city's defenses were connected to it. But the link had been severed. If she could repair that link, the city's power would expand, its defenses strengthened by the ocean itself. She placed both hands on the pillar, the carvings flaring to life under her touch. The crystalline formations around the cavern began to glow brighter, their light spreading outward in rippling waves. Marina could feel the energy flowing through her, merging with the city's network, restoring the connection that had been lost. The shadow struck again, its condensed form slamming against the barrier with a force that sent shockwaves through the ruins. But this time, the barrier held firm. The light from the obelisks surged outward, their energy amplified by the connection to the ocean. Marina felt the city's power growing, its rhythm steady and unbroken. The shadow recoiled, its tendrils retreating as the light pushed it back, but it wasn't defeated, not yet. "It's working," Henry said, his voice filled with cautious hope. "The defenses are stronger." Marina nodded, her focus unbroken. But the shadow isn't done. This is just the beginning." The cavern vibrated with energy, the glow from the crystalline pillar spreading across the walls and reflecting off the water like shattered sunlight. Marina stood rooted to the spot. Her hands pressed firmly against the pillar, feeling the rhythmic pulse of the ocean's energy merging with the city's defenses. The shadow's presence loomed at the edges of her awareness, a dark and heavy force that refused to retreat entirely. These obelisks across the city flared brightly as the restored connection fed into the network, their light spreading outward in powerful waves. The symbols on the walls shifted and realigned, their patterns growing more intricate and dynamic. Marina felt the balance returning, the city and the ocean working together as they had once done long ago. "It's stabilizing," she said, her voice steady but strained. "The connection is holding." Henry stood a few steps behind her, his flashlight darting across the cavern. His jaw was tight, his eyes scanning the crystalline formations as though expecting the shadow to strike at any moment. "For now," he said, "but the shadow's not done. It's regrouping. Marina closed her eyes, focusing on the hum of the city and the ocean's rhythm. She could feel the shadow pressing against the barrier, its tendrils coiling and twisting, testing the defenses for weaknesses. It wasn't retreating, it was biding its time, adapting, waiting for the perfect moment to strike again. "We need to move," she said, her hand slipping from the pillar. "The defenses are holding, but they're not enough. There's something deeper, something the city hasn't shown us yet." Henry hesitated, his expression filled with uncertainty. "Deeper, Marina? We're already at the heart of the city. How much further can we go?" Marina turned to him, her eyes blazing with determination. "The city is connected to the ocean, but it's also connected to something else, something ancient. The visions keep showing me pieces, but I haven't seen the whole picture yet. If we want to stop the shadow, we have to find it." The crystalline formations lit a new path, their glow illuminating a narrow tunnel that descended further into the ruins. The hum of the city was quieter here, replaced by a deeper, more primal vibration that resonated through the water. Marina led the way, her movements deliberate but cautious, her senses tuned to the energy around her. Henry followed close behind, his breathing shallow. "This place feels different," he said. "Different," he said, his voice low. "It's not like the rest of the ruins." Marina nodded, her gaze fixed on the path ahead. "It's older." The tunnel opened into a vast open expanse that took Marina's breath away. The walls were covered in crystalline veins that took Marina's breath away. The walls were covered in crystalline veins that glowed with a soft, steady light, their patterns stretching into the distance like the roots of an ancient tree. At the center of the expanse was a massive, circular pool, its surface shimmering with a silvery glow. The water within the pool was still unnaturally calm, but it radiated a powerful energy that made Marina's skin tingle. "This is it," she said, stepping closer to the edge of the pool. "This is the source." Henry approached cautiously, his flashlight cutting across the water's surface. "It looks alive." "It is," Marina replied. "This isn't just part of the city. It's part of the ocean itself, part of its memory." The lead being appeared at the edge of the chamber, its luminous form flickering. Faintly as it approached, its voice echoed through the expanse, resonating with the hum of the pool. "The source is the wellspring of balance. It is the origin of the city's power and the heart of the ocean's rhythm. To awaken it fully, you awaken it fully, must become part of it." Marina turned to the being, her brow furrowed. "What does that mean?" The being gestured toward the pool, its movements slow and deliberate. "The shadow feeds on imbalance, on chaos. The source must be restored to its full strength to counter it. To do this, you must merge with it, guide it and channel its with it, guide it and channel its energy into the city's defenses." Henry stepped forward, his expression alarmed. "Merge with it, Marina? That sounds dangerous," Marina finished, her gaze fixed on the shimmering water. "But it's the only way," the being nodded, its luminous eyes steady. "The shadow is more than a force. It is an intelligence, a parasite that thrives on division and fear. The source's energy is the only thing strong enough to neutralize it, but it requires a guide, a bridge to focus its power. You are that bridge." Marina felt the weight of the beings, words settle over her. The visions settle over her. The pull of the city, the connection she had felt to the ruins, it had all been leading to this moment. The city had chosen her, and now it was asking her to make the ultimate sacrifice. She glanced at Henry, her expression resolute. "If this works, the shadow will be stopped." Henry's jaw tightened, his hands clenching into fists. "And if it doesn't," Marina smiled faintly, "then at least we tried." She stepped into the pool, the silvery water parting smoothly around her. The energy was immediate, a powerful current that surged through her body, filling her with a sense of connection unlike anything she had experienced before. The hum of the city merged with the rhythm of the ocean, their energies intertwining in a perfect harmony. Marina closed her eyes, allowing herself to sink deeper into the water. The light from the crystalline veins intensified, their glow merging with the silvery pool. She could feel the source's power flowing through her, vast and ancient, as though she were tapping into the very heartbeat of the planet. The shadow struck again. Its shadow struck again, its tendrils slamming against the barrier with renewed fury. The obelisks flared brightly, their light holding firm, but Marina could feel the strain in the defenses. The shadow's presence was overwhelming, its energy seeping into the city like a dark tide. But the source was stronger. Marina focused, her thoughts aligning with the rhythm of the ocean. The energy of the pool surged through her, filling her with a power that felt infinite, boundless. She raised her hands, the light from the pool rising with her, and directed it toward the city's defenses. The obelisks roared to life, their symbols blazing with a unified brilliance. The carvings on the walls pulsed in perfect harmony, their patterns shifting into intricate harmony, their patterns shifting into intricate sequences that spread across the ruins. The shadow hesitated, its tendrils recoiling as the light grew brighter, stronger, more precise, and then, with a deafening roar, the source unleashed its full power. Silvery light erupted from the pool, cascading outward in luminous waves that seemed to touch every corner of the ruins. Marina was at its center, suspended within the glowing water, her body weightless yet charged with the immense energy of the source. The crystalline veins along the cavern walls pulsed in synchrony with her heartbeat, their light weaving into a pattern so intricate it seemed alive. The obelisks across the city flared with renewed intensity, their energy linking into a seamless grid that enclosed themeless ruins in a brilliant barrier. The shadow recoiled violently, its tendrils writhing as they disintegrated under the force of the city's counterattack. For the first time, Marina felt the shadow's hesitation, a flicker of doubt in its relentless onslaught. Henry stood at the edge of the pool, shielding his eyes from the blinding light. "Marina!" he shouted, his voice barely audible over the hum of the source. "It's working," but the shadow, before he could finish, the chamber shook violently. The shadow, though wounded, wasn't retreating. Instead, it condensed again, its form shrinking into a dense, pulsating sphere of darkness that hovered just beyond the barrier. The air, or rather, the water, grew colder, the temperature dropping sharply as the shadow gathered its strength for one final strike. Marina could feel its strength for one final strike. Intent, a dark and malevolent force probing the edges of her mind. The shadow wasn't just attacking the city. It was trying to overwhelm her, to break her connection to the source. She gritted her teeth, her focus unwavering as she channeled the source's energy into the defenses. The shadow struck. The impact was immediate and devastating. The barrier flickered, its light wavering as the shadow's concentrated form slammed against it, with a force that reverberated through the ruins. Marina cried out as the strain hit her, the energy from the source surging through her like a tidal wave. For a moment, she felt as though she might break, her body unable to contain the immense power coursing through her. But then she felt the thing. City respond. The obelisks flared brighter, their light stabilizing as the carvings along the walls shifted into new patterns. The beings surrounding the chamber raised their hands, their luminous forms glowing brighter as they poured their energy into the defenses the network held, pushing back against the shadow with a force that sent ripples through the water. Marina opened her eyes, her vision blazing with silvery light. She could see the shadow clearly now, its dark form pulsing with a desperate, chaotic energy. It wasn't just a force of destruction, it was afraid. The city's defenses were stronger than it had anticipated, their unity and balance disrupting its chaotic nature. "This is your end," Marina said, softly, her voice carrying a calm certainty. She raised her hands higher, the light from the pool intensifying. The energy around her condensed into a focused beam, its brilliance cutting through the chamber like a blade. The shadow recoiled. The shadow recoiled, its tendrils retreating as the light pierced its form, but it didn't disappear entirely. Instead, it began to unravel, its darkness dissipating into the water, like ink dispersing in a current. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Chamber's vibrations slowed, the light from the pool and the crystalline veins dimming to a soft glow. Marina floated to the surface, her body weak but intact, as the source's energy settled into a steady rhythm. The shadow was gone, its presence reduced to faint whispers that faded into the depths. Henry rushed to her side, his hands gripping her shoulders as he helped her stand. "Marina, are you okay? What happened?" She nodded, her breath coming in shallow gasps. "It's over. The shadow, it's gone." The lead being stepped forward, its luminous form flickering faintly. "The shadow is not destroyed," it said, its voice calm but firm. It is contained, bound once more to the depths from which it came. "The balance is restored for now." "For now," Henry echoed, his brow furrowing. "What does that mean?" Marina turned to the being, her gaze steady. "It means the shadow can return if the balance is broken again. The city, the ocean, they're part of something much bigger. If we forget that, the shadow will rise again. The being inclined its vortical will rise again." The being inclined its head. "You have done what we could not. The city's defenses are stronger than they have ever been, and the connection to the ocean has been restored. But the balance requires vigilance. This is not just our burden. It is yours now as well." They ascended back through the ruins. The light from the obelisks and the carvings illuminated their path. The city felt different now, calmer, quieter, but still alive. Marina could feel its presence, a steady hum that resonated in her chest, as though the city were watching her, grateful but expectant. When they reached the submarine, Elisa's voice crackled through the comms. "Marina, Henry, are you all right? The energy readings just stopped. What happened down there?" Marina smiled faintly, exhaustion tugging at her every word. "We stopped it. The city is safe. For now," Henry muttered under his breath, his gaze fixed on the horizon. As the submarine ascended toward the surface, Marina stared out at the ruins, their glowing towers fading into the depths. She felt a strange mix of relief and sadness, knowing that her connection to the city had changed her forever. The ocean was no longer just a vast, mysterious expanse. It was alive, aware, and deeply connected to her. And though the shadow was gone, Marina knew its presence would always linger, a reminder of what could happen if the balance was ever broken again. The surface greeted them with sunlight, the waves calm and unassuming. As they prepared to return to the mainland, Marina turned back one last time, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The city had chosen her, and she had answered its call, but this was only the beginning.